Chapter 2183. The declaration of war by the Heavenly Policy Hall against the Heavenly Yin Tower was akin to the prelude to a chaotic world. Currently, the entire Great Thousand World was filled with the smell of gunpowder. Following the declaration of war between the Heavenly Policy Hall and the Heavenly Yin Tower, the Dan Valley, the Shrines, the Moon Palace, Mutian Mountain, the Sword Sect, and the Heavenly Sect entered a state of confrontation. It was obvious that the two sides had formed two huge alliances. However, due to their mutual restraint, they were unable to participate in the war between the Heavenly Policy Hall and the Heavenly Yin Tower for the time being. The war between the Heavenly Yin Tower and the Heavenly Policy Hall had completely broken out. At the same time, the Heavenly Sect had also started to become a little dishonest recently. According to the continuous news that was sent back from the border between the Sword Mansion and the Heavenly Sect, the experts of the Heavenly Sect seemed to be intentionally or unintentionally gathering at the border between the two mansions. Although they had not shown any intention of attacking the Sword Mansion, the Sword Sect naturally would not take the Heavenly Sect's abnormal behavior lightly. Therefore, after receiving this news, Xiaochen immediately transferred Lin Qing, Li Ku, and Yang Song to the border between the two mansions. There were also many experts from the Sword Sect who accompanied them. The only thing they did was to strengthen the forces at the border of the Sword Mansion to prevent the Heavenly Sect from suddenly attacking. As for Tsang Xing and Nandong Guan, Xiaochen also asked them to temporarily postpone the matter of the martial institution. After all, the Sword Sect still had to prioritize the Heavenly Sect at this time. In the main hall of the Sword Sect, Xiaochen had been paying attention to the Heavenly Sect's every move for the past few days. Any news regarding the Heavenly Sect would be reported to Xiaochen immediately. Tsang Xing, who had returned to the Sword Sect, was sitting on the main seat. At this moment, he was sitting below Xiaochen. He asked with some doubts in his heart, "Will the Heavenly Sect really attack us at this time? I'm not sure. However, once the battle begins this time around, it will clearly be the final battle. Yang Chen will not easily stop until he achieves his goal," Xiaochen replied indifferently. Xiaochen was not sure if Yang Chen was going to declare war on the Sword's Gate, but he was sure that if he were to declare war on the Sword's Gate, it would not be a simple test. It would be a real battle to determine the winner and loser. Therefore, Xiaochen couldn't let his guard down in the face of a battle that could break out at any time. This battle would determine the future of the entire Sword Sect. If they won, the Sword Sect would be able to return to the top and be ranked as one of the top 10 Ling Tian sects again. However, if they lost, everything that Xiaochen and the Sword Sect had done would vanish into thin air. This was a battle of life and death, so naturally, Xiaochen couldn't afford to be careless in the slightest. Xiaochen was paying close attention to the Heavenly Sect's every move, not letting go of even the slightest change. On the other side, Yang Chen and Tao Ming sat opposite each other in the Heavenly Sect. Tao Ming looked at Yang Chen and said indifferently, "Have you really decided to declare war?" "Master, it's about time. This is the best opportunity." Hearing this, Yang Chen seriously nodded his head in response. Yang Chen indeed wanted to declare war on the Sword Sect. The Heavenly Sect had already made preparations for the final battle. Yang Chen didn't want to drag it out any longer because once it did, it would be hard to say how long it would take. Moreover, Yang Chen guessed that although the Sword Sect had always been on guard against the Heavenly Sect, the Sword Sect wasn't actually ready for war. Otherwise, with Xiaochen's personality, he would have already attacked and wouldn't be on the defensive. He couldn't give the Sword Sect any more time to prepare, or the situation would only become more and more disadvantageous for the Heavenly Sect. Hearing Yang Chen's words, Tao Ming nodded and said, "How confident are you?" "About 50-50. After all, the Sword Sect's strength can't be underestimated," Yang Chen replied truthfully. Yang Chen didn't have absolute confidence in dealing with the Sword Sect, but this was reasonable. Otherwise, if he had absolute confidence, he would have already attacked the Sword Sect. Both sides were equal in strength, and if they really fought, it would be hard to say who would emerge victorious. However, this battle was unavoidable. Even if he didn't know what the final outcome would be, Yang Chen still had to fight. Xiaochen had probably thought it through. In this world, there were many times when you couldn't choose to retreat if you weren't confident. There were some things that you could only bravely advance even if you weren't confident. This was the situation that forced you to do so. Just like Yang Chen now, he knew that it was impossible to coexist peacefully with the Sword Sect. Therefore, even if he wasn't confident, Yang Chen still had to choose to fight. After hearing Yang Chen's words, Tao Ming nodded slightly and said, "Now that the Heavenly Policy Mansion and the Heavenly Yin Tower are at war, the shrines and Mutian Mountain are enough to contain the Moon Palace and Dan Valley. However, I'm still worried about the Dragon Palace." Tao Ming expressed his worries. The Dragon Palace and the Sword Sect had a close relationship. Once the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect started a war, the Dragon Palace would definitely not stand by and watch. However, after hearing Tao Ming's words, Yang Chen smiled slightly and said, "Master, don't worry. I've already thought of this and have been preparing for it. Now, I'm just waiting for the right time." Of course, Yang Chen had thought of these things. He had been waiting for this opportunity. As long as the Dragon Palace was contained, the Sword Sect wouldn't have an outer yard. Then, the Heavenly Sect would start a war with the Sword Sect. After hearing Yang Chen's words and looking at his disciple, Tao Ming smiled with relief and said, "Then I'll leave it to you. When the time comes, I'll only contain Jun Wuya and won't give him any chance to intervene." In the war between the Heavenly Sect and the Sword Sect, Tao Ming's only task was to deal with Jun Wuya. As long as Jun Wuya was contained, Tao Ming's task would be completed. However, the real destruction of the Sword Sect still depended on the victory of Xiaochen, Yang Chen, and the experts of the two sects below. After hearing Tao Ming's words, Yang Chen nodded in agreement. According to his guess, the opportunity he had been waiting for would appear in the next 2 days. At that time, the Dragon Palace would inevitably be involved in the war. At that time, the Heavenly Sect could start a war with the Sword Sect. While Yang Chen was waiting for the opportunity to start the war, the experts of the Heavenly Sect were constantly rushing to the border between the Sword Mansion and the Heavenly Sect. As more and more experts of the Heavenly Sect arrived at the border between the two mansions, Xiaochen also sent more experts there. After Li Ku, Yang Song, and Lin Qing, Xiaochen sent Nandong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan to the front line. At the same time, more than half of the experts of the Sword Sect had arrived at the front line and were ready to deal with the attack of the Heavenly Sect. At this point, Xiaochen could almost conclude that the war between the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect was coming. Yang Chen finally couldn't bear it anymore and wanted to fight with him to the death. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 2184. All signs indicated that the war between the Heavenly Sect and the Sword Sect was not far away. At the same time, the subordinate forces of the two forces were mobilized. More and more experts began to gather at the border of the two prefectures. It could be said that they had put in all their effort for this war. Not only Yang Chen, but also Xiaochen. While the situation between the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect was getting more and more tense, on the other side, Dao Ju received an unexpected piece of news in the Saber Sect. In the most secluded cave residence in the Saber Sect, Dao Xiong's residence. At this moment, Dao Xiong and Dao Ju were sitting on the top of a mountain. A cold light flashed in their eyes as Dao Xiong said coldly, "Juer, it's time to make a decision." Dao Xiong asked Dao Ju to make a decision. Just a few days ago, there was a piece of news from the Dragon Palace that Dao Xiong's wife, Dao Ju's mother, was killed by the people of the Dragon Palace. At that time, the two sects went to explore an ancient site together. However, in the end, Dao Ju's mother died in the ancient site. According to the Dragon Palace, Dao Ju's mother was killed by the mysterious power in the ancient site. Because of this, the Saber Sect and the Dragon Palace had a war. Even Dao Xiong and Wang Yuan personally took part in it. However, in the end, there was no substantial evidence to prove that his wife was killed by the Dragon Palace. In addition, for the sake of the overall situation, the matter was left unsettled. However, just a few days ago, there was news that Dao Xiong's wife's corpse was still in the Dragon Palace. This was completely contrary to what the Dragon Palace had said. Back then, the Dragon Palace said that Dao Xiong's wife's corpse was already gone. However, now, someone saw her corpse in the Dragon Palace. As a result, people could not help but guess that Dao Xiong's temperament had actually died at the hands of the Dragon Palace. Back then, because they had discovered some kind of treasure, the people of the Dragon Palace had mercilessly killed Dao Xiong's wife and a group of experts from the Saber sect, monopolizing the treasure. As soon as the news came out, Dao Ju immediately sent people to investigate, but the news was true. One could imagine Dao Xiong's mood when he heard the news. That was why he told Dao Ju that it was time to make a decision. And that decision was to declare war on Dragon Palace. No matter what, he could not let go of what had happened in the past. At the very least, he had to get Dao Xiong's wife's corpse back. After hearing Dao Xiong's words, Dao Ju replied seriously. Indeed, it's time. Sigh, what happened was too strange. Dao Ju also realized that it might have been secretly planned by someone in order to provoke a war between Saber sect and Dragon Palace. But so what if he guessed it? As long as his mother's body was in the hands of the Dragon Palace, the Dao Ju would definitely declare war on the Dragon Palace. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The person behind this was indeed a good trick. Even though he had guessed everything, there was nothing he could do but to jump into the pit. This was an overt conspiracy. Even if you knew everything, so what? You still had to follow the plan of the person behind this. Saber Ju's mood was a little complicated. On the other side of the Dragon Palace, Long Yuan and Long Qing were furious. In the main hall of Dragon Palace, Long Yuan sat on the main seat. Beside him, Long Qing stood with a cold face. Below, a Dragon Clan expert who had been tied up was kneeling in front of Long Yuan. Looking at him, Long Yuan said fiercely, Who made you do this? This Dragon Clan expert was the fuse of this incident. He was also the one who exposed Dao Ju's mother's corpse to the public. In Dragon Palace, this man was actually just an insignificant deacon. Although he had a cultivation of the Enlightenment realm, there were at least 800 people like him in Dragon Palace at that time. Usually, no one would pay attention to him. But who was there first? This time, because of him, the Dragon Palace and the Saber sect were on the verge of war. Looking at Dao Ju, Long Yuan and Long Qing immediately guessed that there must be a deacon behind this, and his purpose was to cause a war between the Dragon Palace and the Saber sect. Long Yuan asked with murderous intent in his eyes. At the same time, wisps of cold murderous intent were constantly emitted from his body and were shrouded by Long Yuan's aura. The person below clenched his teeth tightly. Long Yuan was an Emperor Realm expert. To bear his aura was indeed very stressful for this Dragon Palace expert. However, after this incident, this person knew that there was no way to change his fate. So, at this time, he simply threw caution to the wind. Anyway, he was going to die, so there was nothing to be afraid of. At this moment, everyone resisted the pressure from Long Yuan and sneered. No one. I found out all of this by accident. Naturally, no one would believe his words. As his voice fell, Long Qing, who was standing beside Long Yuan, said in a deep voice, Even if you don't say it, we know. It's Yang Chen, right? It's Yang Chen who asked you to deliberately start a war between the Dragon Palace and the Saber sect so that the Dragon Palace can't support the Sword sect, and he can take this opportunity to fight to the death with the Sword sect. Long Qing said that the mastermind behind all of this was Yang Chen. In the entire Great Thousand World, the person who wanted the Dragon Palace to go to war the most was Yang Chen. In Yang Chen's plan, the Dragon Palace could go to war with anyone. As long as he could restrain the Dragon Palace and prevent them from helping the Sword sect, it would be enough. However, at this time, Yang Chen used some unknown method to find the corpse of Dao Ju's mother. Thinking back to what had happened in the past, Yang Chen naturally targeted the Saber sect. He wanted to use what had happened in the past, as well as the corpse of Dao Ju's mother, to force a war between the two forces. Now, it seemed that Yang Chen had succeeded. Whether the Dragon Palace and the Saber sect were willing or not, this war was unavoidable. As Long Qing said this, a strange look flashed in the eyes of the expert from the Dragon Palace. He had been observing this person. Immediately, Long Qing noticed the change in this person's expression. He was sure that this matter was related to Yang Chen. The culprit had been found, and even Yang Chen's purpose was known. Even so, what could they do? Now, it was not a matter of whether the Dragon Palace was willing to go to war with the Saber sect, but the Saber sect would definitely declare war on the Dragon Palace. After knowing everything, there was nothing he could do. His expression gradually returned to normal. In the end, Long Yuan could only say a few words casually. It's a complete mess. If you want to fight, then let's fight. Pass down the order to prepare for the Saber sect's attack. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 2185. Although Long Yuan already knew that Heavenly Sect was behind all of this and had guessed Yang Chen's motive, there was nothing he could do to resolve the situation. At the same time, Long Yuan also knew that Dao Zhu and Dao Xiong must have guessed that someone was behind all of this. However, they had no choice as they had to fight this battle. Following Long Yuan's order, Dragon Palace quickly made preparations for the battle. At the same time, only 3 days later, Dao Zhu declared war on Dragon Palace as the sect leader of Saber sect. Before Dragon Palace could respond, a large number of experts from Saber sect had already entered Sky Dragon Mansion, which was under the control of Dragon Palace. Instantly, the battle between the two sects broke out. After the war between Heavenly Policy Mansion and Heavenly Yin Tower, Saber sect and Dragon Palace also broke out in a fierce battle. At this time, 4 out of the 10 Ling Tian sects had already broken out in battle. However, if one thought that all of this was over, one would be gravely mistaken. It could even be said that this was only the beginning of the chaos in the Great Thousand World. The outbreak of the battle between Dragon Palace and Saber sect naturally attracted the attention of countless warriors in the Great Thousand World. At the same time, Xiaochen, who was in the Sword sect, also immediately realized that the battle between the Sword sect and Heavenly sect was not far away. Immediately, Xiaochen ordered everyone in the Sword sect to enter a state of combat readiness and be ready to welcome Heavenly sect's attack at any time. Xiaochen did not know the inside story of the battle between Dragon Palace and Saber sect, but Xiaochen guessed that Yang Chen had been waiting for this opportunity. After all, the sects that had a good relationship with the Sword sect had already been pinned down, and only Dragon Palace had the possibility of helping. However, now that Dragon Palace had also started a war with Saber sect, there was naturally no possibility of helping the Sword sect. Yang Chen was waiting for such an opportunity. The Moon Palace was being held back by the shrines, the Heavenly Policy Hall had already started a war with the Heavenly Yin Tower, and the Dan Valley was facing off against the Mutian Mountain. If the Sword sect and the Heavenly sect were to start a war, there were no other forces that could help the Sword sect. Xiaochen gave the order for everyone to prepare for battle. Meanwhile, Yang Chen was finally ready to go to war with the Heavenly Gate. Yang Chen and Tao Ming sat together in the main hall of the Heavenly Union sect. A map of the Sword Mansion and the Heavenly Union sect was placed before them. Looking at the map, Yang Chen's gaze did not lock onto the border between the two manors. At this time, the two sects had already deployed a large number of troops there. Many experts had gathered there, so there was no need to linger there. Yang Chen was currently paying attention to other places. Unlike Tao Ming, Yang Chen didn't want to fight the Sword sect head-on. Instead, he wanted to use his aura as a tactic. He wanted to use the many experts to confuse Xiaochen with the intention of making Xiaochen think that his strategy was a head-on attack. However, in reality, Yang Chen wanted to use a surprise attack. At the time when Xiaochen least expected, he wanted to appear at the place where Xiaochen least expected. This way, he would be able to achieve a surprising effect. In order to achieve the goal of a surprise attack, he first had to think of a way to avoid the Sword sect's eyes and sneak into the Sword Mansion. Following the map, Yang Chen looked all the way to the core area of the Sword Mansion. Finally, he pointed at a point on the map. It's here. After finding the target, Yang Chen immediately said to Tao Ming, "Master, I'll leave the front to you." Yang Chen intended to let Tao Ming take charge of the front line. After all, the front line was just a distraction for Tao Ming. Therefore, having Tao Ming appear in the front line was undoubtedly the best, because it could attract Jun Huiya there. Once the two sects started a war, there was no doubt that wherever Yang Chen appeared, Jun Huiya would also appear. 315 Chinese network. Therefore, if Tao Ming was placed in the front, Jun Huiya could only go to the front and resist Tao Ming. Hearing Yang Chen's words, Tao Ming nodded slightly and said, "Don't worry. However, a month is the limit. Jun Huiya is slightly stronger than me. If the battle drags on, I will definitely be the one to lose. Therefore, you must hurry up." Tao Ming knew how strong Jun Huiya was. This was something that he had personally experienced. According to Tao Ming's estimation, he could only hold Jun Huiya back for a month at most. After a month, the difference in strength between the two would gradually become apparent due to his injuries and exhaustion. At that time, Tao Ming would definitely lose, and there was even a possibility of him being killed. Therefore, Tao Ming hoped that Yang Chen could hurry up and end the battle as soon as possible. Even if he couldn't end the battle, he should at least be able to gain a certain advantage. Only then would the situation gradually tilt towards the heavenly sect. In response to Tao Ming's reminder, Yang Chen nodded noncommittally. Then, the master and disciple went their separate ways. On that day, Yang Chen officially declared war on the Sword Sect as the sect leader of the heavenly sect. Following the declaration of war by the heavenly sect, many experts from the heavenly sect, who had already gathered at the border of the two palaces, immediately launched an attack on the Sword Sect. However, the Sword Sect's response was not very good. They immediately made preparations to fight. In an instant, a huge battle broke out at the border of the two palaces. The heavenly sect and the Sword Sect had already started fighting. Out of the 11 strongest forces in the Great Thousand World, 6 of them had already started fighting. The flames of war had spread across the entire Great Thousand World. Moreover, no one knew when the remaining forces would start fighting again. The heavenly sect and Yang Chen's declaration of war did not exceed Xiao Chen's expectations. In fact, it could be said that everything was within Xiao Chen's expectations. However, there was one thing that made Xiao Chen feel a little strange. The battle seemed a little strange because Yang Chen's figure did not appear at the front line. He felt that Yang Chen was definitely plotting something. Therefore, Xiao Chen did not leave the Sword Sect. On the other hand, Jun Huiya had already rushed to the front line because of Tao Ming. At the front line, many experts from both sides were fighting fiercely. Jun Huiya and Tao Ming also appeared at the same time. The two emperors stood proudly in the sky. In response, the experts from both sects fought even more fiercely. Their eyes met, and Jun Huiya looked at Tao Ming and said, "Tao Ming, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to escape this time." A rare murderous intent flashed in Jun Huiya's eyes. It seemed that this time, Jun Huiya really wanted to kill Tao Ming. In the face of Jun Huiya's murderous intent, Tao Ming said noncommittally, "Jun Huiya, although you're strong, this is a war between two great sects. Even if you're the strongest person in the Great Thousand World, it's too easy for you to change the entire situation with your own strength." As he spoke, a golden light shot up into the sky from Tao Ming's body. At the same time, his aura continued to rise and soon reached its peak. Chapter 2186. Tao Ming knew that he wasn't a match for Jun Huiya. However, this was a battle between two great sections. It would be difficult for Jun Huiya to change the situation by himself unless he had the ability to kill Tao Ming in a short time. Unfortunately, Jun Huiya couldn't do that for now. Sensing the terrifying aura from Tao Ming, Jun Huiya also released an aura that didn't show any signs of weakness. Instantly, the two sovereigns engaged in a fierce battle. As the strongest person in the Great Thousand World, Jun Huiya's strength was indeed unparalleled. However, even though Tao Ming wasn't as strong as Jun Huiya, he still had the ability to fight back. On the battlefield, both sides fought fiercely. No one was willing to be outdone, and no one was willing to lose. After brewing for such a long time, the battle between the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect finally began. However, Xiaochen and Yangchen didn't appear on the battlefield. Moreover, it wasn't just the two of them. There were other experts who didn't appear either. Although both the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect had gathered a powerful force and many experts on the battlefield, if one was careful enough, one would realize that this wasn't the full strength of the two great sections. Both sides had at least one End Realm expert and several Dao Realm experts who didn't appear on the battlefield. The whereabouts of these experts had become a mystery. Xiaochen didn't know about the situation on Yang Chen's side. He was still in the Sword Sect. Xiaochen, who didn't go to the front lines, was studying the map of the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect. At the same time, Sang Xing and the 5 sword heads of the Sword Sect also didn't go to the front lines. The remaining experts were also waiting for orders in the Sword Sect. The reason Xiaochen left these people behind and did not send all of them to the main battlefield was because Xiaochen instinctively felt that something was wrong. Yangchen had not appeared on the main battlefield since the beginning. A sneak attack. Xiaochen instantly guessed that Yangchen was going to launch a sneak attack. But even so, it wasn't easy to determine where exactly Yangchen would launch his sneak attack. Moreover, what made Xiaochen feel strange was that up until now, not a single one of the numerous spies sent out by the Sword Sect had grasped Yangchen's whereabouts. In other words, Xiaochen didn't even know where Yangchen was. Xiaochen had completely lost track of Yangchen. He had no idea where Yangchen was or what Yangchen was doing. This made him increasingly anxious. As a matter of fact, Xiaochen wasn't too worried about the main battlefield because based on the current situation, both sides were actually evenly matched in terms of strength. No one had a huge advantage and no one had fallen into a disadvantageous position. Therefore, it was impossible to determine the victor on the main battlefield at this moment. Therefore, the key point was still Yangchen's current location. While staring at the map as though in deep thought, as though trying to determine where Yangchen might launch a sneak attack or appear, Xiaochen asked Sang Xing, "Is there still no news of Yangchen?" "No, Sect Master." "Do you really think that Yangchen can sneak into the hinterland of our sword mansion and launch a sneak attack?" Sang Xing asked dubiously. Xiaochen replied simply, "Based on the current situation, this is the most likely thing to happen and also the most effective means to deal a heavy blow to us. With Yangchen's personality, he won't miss this opportunity. In the current situation, it was better to be safe than sorry because once Yangchen seized the opportunity, it would be a devastating blow to the Sword Sect." Hearing Xiaochen's words, Sang Xing still didn't understand. But now that the entire Sword Sect has been sealed off, how can Yangchen drive straight in? Could it be that he can use the other mansions and circle around to our sword mansion? Sang Xing asked the question in his heart without giving it much thought. However, Xiaochen was stunned when he heard this. He then muttered to himself excitedly, "Why didn't I think of that?" Sang Xing's words enlightened Xiaochen. All along, Xiaochen thought that Yangchen would drive straight into the hinterland of the Sword Sect. However, didn't Sang Xing say that Yangchen could use the other mansions? Xiaochen suddenly realized something when he heard what Lu Xian had said. Indeed, the Sword Sect had been completely sealed off by the Sword Mansion. It would be very difficult for Yangchen to drive straight into the hinterland of the Sword Mansion from the Hetian Prefecture. However, if Yangchen could use the other mansions to get to the Sword Mansion like what Sang Xing said, then he could bypass the main battlefield and successfully appear behind the Sword Mansion. Following this train of thought, Xiaochen looked at the map and kept looking to the north. Finally, Xiaochen's gaze locked onto Tong City. Tong City was located in the northernmost part of the Sword Mansion and also belonged to the border of the Sword Mansion. However, it was in a completely different direction from the Hetian Prefecture. As a result of the battle with the Hetian sect, Tong City had become a major backline. It seemed like Tong City was the safest place. However, in Xiaochen's opinion, Tong City was the most dangerous place. Because it was far away from the Hetian Prefecture, the defense of Tong City was extremely lax. Most of the experts had been transferred to the main battlefield. Most importantly, if Yangchen set off from the Hetian Prefecture, then he could bypass the main battlefield and reach Tong City through the Myriad Weapon Prefecture. Moreover, the Myriad Weapon Prefecture was now under the control of the Heavenly Yin Tower. It was extremely chaotic in the midst of the battle. Yangchen could definitely use the Hetian Prefecture to launch a surprise attack on Tong City. Moreover, and most importantly, this was also why Xiaochen thought that Yang Chen's surprise attack target was very likely to be Tong City. That was because there were many spiritual stone veins around Tong City. If these veins were destroyed, it would definitely be a devastating blow to the Sword Sect. Think about it. What was the purpose of this war? It was not only a battle of the hard power of the two sects, but also a battle of soft power, wealth, and confidence. Healing pills, talismans, and other consumables needed money to buy. Without money, there would be no such things. The consequences were self-evident. It could be said that this war was a battle of the confidence of the two sections. Whoever had more confidence would have a higher chance of winning. Tong City had so many spiritual stone veins. If it was destroyed, the loss to the Sword Sect would be immeasurable, especially during such a critical period. The more Xiaochen thought about it, the more he felt that Yang Chen's target was Tong City. Moreover, if Yang Chen successfully attacked Tong City, he could directly turn around and form a siege on the battlefield. At that time, the situation would be even more disadvantageous for the Sword Sect. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. Chapter 2187. Because of Tsang Xing's words, Xiaochen was suddenly enlightened. Tong City, which he had not noticed before, also appeared in Xiaochen's field of vision. He could not help but sigh in his heart. If he had not reacted in time, Tong City would have suffered a devastating blow. Because of Tsang Xing's words, Xiaochen was suddenly enlightened. Tong City, which he had not noticed before, also appeared in Xiaochen's field of vision. He could not help but sigh in his heart. If he had not reacted in time, Tong City would have suffered a devastating blow. Staring at the map, Xiaochen carefully looked around Tong City. Then, he fixed his gaze on the west side of Tong City. If Yangchen really wanted to use the Myriad Weapon Mansion to launch a sneak attack on Tong City, then this was the place he had to pass through. Although there was no evidence to prove that Yangchen would definitely appear in Tong City, Xiaochen was still willing to believe in his own speculation. In addition, Tong City was too important and could not be lost. Therefore, Xiaochen immediately ordered Tsang Xing to lead the remaining Sword Sect experts to Tong City. Time was of the essence. Xiaochen did not even have the time to inform Qin Shuru and the other girls. He directly led his men and left the Sword Sect, heading straight for Tong City. While Xiaochen had sensed the danger in Tong City and was rushing over, Yangchen was indeed in the Myriad Weapon Estate. Judging from the direction he was heading in, he was undoubtedly heading towards Tong City. Xiaochen's guess was correct. Yangchen did not appear on the main battlefield. His purpose was to lead his men to launch a sneak attack on Tong City, destroy the many spirit stone veins around Tong City, and then head straight to the main battlefield to form a siege. Yangchen knew very well what it meant to destroy the spirit stone veins around Tong City. It would be a huge blow to the Sword Sect. Therefore, Yangchen did not stop at all after the battle between the two factions began. He headed straight for Tong City. In order to avoid being detected by the Sword Sect's spies, Yangchen even deliberately passed through the Thousand Weapon Estate. Although this would delay him a little, at least he could keep it a secret. As they sped along, Tong City was getting closer and closer. However, Yangchen started to feel uncertain. He did not know if Xiaochen would be able to detect his intentions. But now that things had come to this, Yangchen had no way out. The Battle of Tong City had to be carried out. Otherwise, all of Yangchen's previous efforts would be in vain. Yangchen suspected that Xiaochen might be aware of his intentions. Yangchen's group quickly entered the Sword Mansion through the 10,000 Weapon Mansion. Tong City was right in front of them. As the group entered the Sword Mansion and was about to reach Tong City, Yangchen became even more cautious. He did not dare to be careless. At the same time, he slowed down a little. The heavenly sect elder who followed Yang Chen asked in puzzlement, "Sect master, we are not far from Tong City. Why don't we just kill our way over?" Tong City was right in front of him, but Yang Chen had suddenly slowed down. Naturally, the elder was puzzled. However, Yang Chen frowned and said, "I feel that something is not right." Yang Chen seemed to have sensed something. Hearing this, the elder still did not understand. However, Yang Chen did not intend to explain further. He just warned the group to be careful. In fact, Yang Chen's worries were not unfounded. Along the way, after entering the Sword Mansion, Yang Chen carefully discovered that there was not a single person in the villages and towns they passed by. Although they had not reached Tong City yet, the villages around Tong City seemed to have been emptied. It was indeed a little strange. However, Yang Chen naturally did not know that before they arrived, Xiao Chen had already moved all the people around to Tong City. This was to arrange a battlefield for both sides to fight without any scruples. It would not affect the ordinary people. Xiao Chen had been waiting for Yang Chen for a long time. Although Yang Chen showed enough vigilance, in the end, he still entered Xiao Chen's line of sight. It was the battlefield that was prepared for both sides. Although they were very careful along the way, Yang Chen still led the group to the mountain range to the west of Tong City after half a day. There seemed to be nothing unusual about the mountain range. However, just as Yang Chen and the others entered the mountain range, red flames suddenly shot up into the sky from the mountain range. These were the lights produced by the talisman arrays. Caught off guard, the two heavenly sect experts were instantly swallowed by the flames. Upon seeing this, Yang Chen reacted immediately and tried to save the two of them. However, he was still a step too late. Moreover, more and more talisman arrays were activated at this moment. Yang Chen and the others were instantly attacked fiercely. Xiao Chen and the others had been waiting for a long time and were fully prepared. Now that the talisman arrays were activated, Yang Chen and the others were indeed exhausted from dealing with them. Damn it! Yang Chen cursed inwardly while resisting the attacks of the talisman arrays. He knew that Xiao Chen had seen through his intentions. It seemed that this sneak attack on Tong City had failed. However, it was too late to escape now. Moreover, with so many talisman arrays, several experts from the heavenly sect died on the spot. The sudden attack of the talisman arrays was something that the experts of the heavenly sect did not expect. Several of them died, while Yang Chen led the remaining people to resist. In the end, they managed to defeat the talisman arrays. After that, Yang Chen looked at the empty sky and said in a deep voice, "Xiao Chen, since you're here, why bother hiding?" Yang Chen was sure that Xiao Chen was here. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chen, Tsang Xing, and the other experts of the sword sect appeared one after another. Xiao Chen fixed his gaze on Yang Chen and said with a faint smile, "Brother Yang Chen, what do you think of this greeting gift? It's not bad, right?" Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, the frost python in Yang Chen's eyes grew denser. He thought that his plan was flawless, but in the end, Xiao Chen saw through it. Moreover, Xiao Chen was already prepared for this. As a result, before both sides even fought, Yang Chen's side had already lost several people. This clearly put Yang Chen in a disadvantageous situation. However, at this moment, the battle between both sides had already begun. It was impossible for Yang Chen to retreat now. Therefore, after hearing Xiao Chen's words, Yang Chen could only sneer and say without backing down, "Xiao Chen, do you think you can stop me like this?" "I'm not stopping you. I'm going to kill you here," Xiao Chen said with a sneer. The murderous intent in his eyes shot out explosively without any concealment. Xiao Chen indeed intended to kill Yang Chen here. If he could really do it, it would definitely be of great help in this battle. After all, even the sect master was dead. The morale of the heavenly sect would definitely take a hit. When that time came, the sword sect wouldn't be far from victory. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend me. Chapter 2188. He wanted to kill him here. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Yang Chen laughed out loud. Xiao Chen, do you have the ability? Xiao Chen wanted to kill him, and Yang Chen had the same thought. Facing Yang Chen's cold laughter, Xiao Chen didn't say anything more. His aura soared into the sky, and he used his actions to give Yang Chen an answer. As Xiao Chen revealed his aura, Sang Xing and the other sword sect experts did the same. Yang Chen and the others were also prepared to fight. Ever since Yang Chen took over the heavenly sect, this was the first time he faced Xiao Chen head-on. He didn't underestimate Xiao Chen. Yang Chen knew that Xiao Chen was strong and wasn't weaker than him. So, he couldn't be careless. With a thought, the Wuchen sword appeared in Xiao Chen's hands. With the Wuchen sword in hand, Xiao Chen took a step forward and his body instantly disappeared. At the same time, Yang Chen did the same. He also took a step forward and his body instantly disappeared. Then, right above them, there was a wave of spiritual energy battle. It was obvious that Xiao Chen and Yang Chen had already started fighting. As the battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen started, Sang Xing and the other sword sect experts and the heavenly sect experts all attacked. All of a sudden, both sides were engaged in an intense battle. In the mountain range west of Tong City, the experts of the two sects were fighting. As the sect leaders, Xiao Chen and Yang Chen were fighting without any mercy. Yang Chen held a long blade and clashed with Xiao Chen. This could be considered the first time the two of them fought. One had to admit that both sides were strong. Their cultivations were at the small success stage of the Dao realm. However, the combat strength that they exploded out was enough to fight against end realm experts. Bolts of lightning coalesced around Yang Chen as he lashed out with his blade. The blade aura was like a bolt of lightning as it lashed out at Xiao Chen. Facing Yang Chen's blade, Xiao Chen didn't show any weakness. He swept his sword and the blood-red sword sect collided with the lightning blade light. After a fierce explosion, a strong airflow spread out crazily. At the same time, they were both geniuses of the Great Thousand World. Their combat strength was almost the same. At least until now, after hundreds of moves, Xiao Chen and Yang Chen hadn't gained any advantage. A strange glint flashed across Yang Chen's eyes after this head-on clash. However, his mouth did not give in at all. Xiao Chen, is that all you have? If that's the case, then it's too disappointing. As he spoke, Yang Chen's entire body seemed to have transformed into a bolt of lightning. His figure instantly disappeared from the spot. He was extremely fast and directly charged towards Xiao Chen. He still didn't know what kind of special physique Yang Chen had. Although Xiao Chen had specially investigated Yang Chen before, there was very little information about Yang Chen. Even though Xiao Chen had thought of many ways to understand Yang Chen, Xiao Chen still didn't know much about Yang Chen. Yang Chen turned into a bolt of lightning and directly charged towards Xiao Chen. In the blink of an eye, Yang Chen's voice appeared behind Xiao Chen. Then, he shouted in a low voice, "Lightning Shadow." Along with the voice, 5 Yang Chens suddenly appeared around Xiao Chen. It was impossible to tell which one was Yang Chen's real body. In other words, Yang Chen's move couldn't be differentiated between real and fake at all. This was because after the 5 Yang Chens appeared, they actually attacked Xiao Chen at the same time. Moreover, each Yang Chen had the ability to attack. Zilang literature, it became 1 against 5. For a moment, Xiao Chen seemed to be under a lot of pressure. On the other hand, Yang Chen seized the opportunity and attacked even more fiercely. He didn't give Xiao Chen any time to breathe at all. "Xiao Chen, do you think you have a chance of winning against 5 of us?" Yang Chen said coldly as he attacked fiercely. Yang Chen's move was indeed beyond Xiao Chen's expectation. Moreover, this move was indeed extremely strange. If it was just an afterimage, it would be easy to deal with. After all, afterimages didn't have the ability to attack. They could only serve to confuse him. However, the 5 Yang Chens in front of him were obviously not ordinary afterimages. This was because each Yang Chen had the ability to attack. It was indeed the first time Xiao Chen had seen such a strange move. However, if Yang Chen wanted to defeat him with just this, it would be too easy. Xiao Chen's expression did not change when he heard Yang Chen's words. Yang Chen, aren't you looking down on me a little too much? There's no need to test me with these little tricks. Xiao Chen did not panic too much in the face of Yang Chen's strange move. With that, over a dozen blood-red swords appeared around Xiao Chen. Under Xiao Chen's control, they directly attacked Yang Chen. The blood-red swords were like over a dozen sword cultivators against the 5 Yang Chens. Immediately, the intense battle between the two of them returned to an intense state. It was indeed impossible for Yang Chen to defeat Xiao Chen with these little tricks. Yang Chen knew this as well. He was unable to do anything against the blood-red swords controlled by Xiao Chen. Having broken through to the perfection of sword body, it was no longer difficult for Xiao Chen to control over a dozen blood-red swords at the same time. It was very easy for him to do so. The 5 Yang Chens fought against the blood-red swords. Neither side could do anything to the other. Faced with such an outcome, Yang Chen took the initiative to attack. In the intense battle, lightning suddenly erupted from the 5 Yang Chens as they called out at the same time. Thunderstorm. As the voices of the 5 Yang Chens rang out, their bodies emitted dazzling white light. At the same time, a terrifying aura surged wildly and wantonly. They wanted to self-destruct. Seeing this, Xiao Chen did not hesitate at all. He used Sword Wall, creating a barrier of countless blood-red swords around him, firmly protecting him. Xiao Chen defended, while the Yang Chens attacked. For a moment, the terrifying shockwaves of an explosion swept across the sky. The 5 Yang Chens self-destructed at the same time. Lightning crisscrossed in the sky, and Xiao Chen was engulfed by the countless bolts of lightning. A long while later, the lightning slowly dissipated, and Yang Chen's figure reappeared in the sky. Seeing Xiao Chen surrounded by countless bolts of lightning, Yang Chen did not show the slightest hint of complacency. He knew that the attack just now was not enough to seriously injure Xiao Chen. Sure enough, as the lightning dissipated, a sword wall formed by countless blood-red swords appeared before Yang Chen. Then, the blood-red swords slowly dissipated, and Xiao Chen appeared before Yang Chen again, completely unharmed. Xiao Chen sneered after perfectly blocking Yang Chen's attack. Yang Chen, there's no need to play such tricks. It's meaningless. Chapter 2189. Yang Chen's attack did not cause any harm to Xiao Chen. However, Yang Chen seemed to have expected this and was not too concerned about it. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Yang Chen sneered. You're right. It's time to put an end to this boring test. In Yang Chen's opinion, the previous battle was just a test between the two of them. There was no real meaning to it. Moreover, Yang Chen did not expect to defeat Xiao Chen in this way. In Yang Chen's opinion, if he wanted to defeat Xiao Chen, he had to at least use his trump card. Even so, Yang Chen did not have absolute confidence that he could defeat Xiao Chen, not to mention the previous test. The previous test was completely useless against Xiao Chen and Yang Chen. As soon as he finished speaking, without waiting for Xiao Chen's reply, the lightning around Yang Chen's body suddenly became violent. At the same time, a thick black cloud condensed in the sky and instantly enveloped the entire valley. At the same time, countless lightning bolts continuously struck from the black cloud. For a moment, the entire valley seemed to have arrived at the end of the world. Looking at Yang Chen, who was enveloped by lightning, a strange look flashed in Xiao Chen's eyes. He then whispered softly, Thunder King Physique. Yang Chen's special physique was the Thunder King Physique. In the Great Thousand World, there were many physiques that could control lightning, but the Thunder King Physique was definitely the best. Among all the special physiques related to lightning, the Thunder King Physique was the strongest. There was no doubt about this, and it was also recognized by all the warriors. It was unexpected that Yang Chen had the Thunder King Physique. This was somewhat beyond Xiao Chen's expectations. The Thunder King Physique was known for its attacking power, and it was comparable to Xiao Chen's sword physique. Under the encirclement of countless lightning bolts, Yang Chen seemed to have turned into a thunder god, giving people a chilling feeling. This was probably the first time that Yang Chen had displayed his true combat strength in front of so many people. Given Yang Chen's character, he was not flamboyant. On the contrary, he preferred to hide in the dark. Therefore, among the geniuses of the Great Thousand World, Yang Chen could be said to be the most low-key person. He did not have any outstanding battle achievements. However, this did not mean that Yang Chen was weak. After all, there was naturally a reason why he could be included in the ranks of geniuses. At this moment, the strength that Yang Chen displayed did indeed prove this point. However, Xiao Chen was not the slightest bit nervous when faced with Yang Chen, who had unleashed his full power. On the contrary, his eyes revealed a hint of excitement as he sneered and said, "That's right. This is what makes it interesting." With that, Xiao Chen directly activated his sword avatar. At the same time, he unleashed the sword realm. Many blood-red swords quickly condensed within the lightning. Accompanied by the appearance of these blood-red swords, the lightning in the sky seemed to have been provoked. It was unwilling to admit defeat as it continuously slashed at these blood-red swords. However, under the attack of the lightning, the blood-red swords also emitted a sharp sword aura. Both sides did not give in to each other and had begun to contend with each other. Compared to Yang Chen, Xiao Chen was obviously much more famous in the Great Thousand World. After all, in the years that he had been in the Great Thousand World, Xiao Chen could be said to have relied on his own strength to fight his way to the top. He had encountered many powerful opponents and had many glorious battle achievements. Therefore, Yang Chen was not familiar with Xiao Chen's sword avatar. 518 Chinese network. Looking at Xiao Chen, who was surrounded by countless blood-red swords, Yang Chen's eyes were overflowing with fighting spirit. "I wonder if your sword avatar or my Thunder King avatar is better." The sword avatar was famous for its powerful offensive power. However, the Thunder King avatar was also known for its offensive power. Moreover, this was the first time Yang Chen had encountered the sword avatar. This was known as the sword avatar that sword cultivators in the world yearned for the most. Yang Chen really wanted to see how strong it was. As soon as he said that, the lightning in the sky quickly formed a lightning net around the two of them. It intertwined with the countless blood-red swords, and for a moment, it gave off an extremely shocking feeling. "Thunder Prison!" Yang Chen shouted in a low voice. The Thunder Prison was formed, and the Thunder Prison was actually similar to Xiao Chen's sword realm. In the Thunder Prison, Yang Chen's combat power could be greatly enhanced. The sword realm and the Thunder Prison collided and resisted each other. However, for a moment, no one could do anything to the other. As for Xiao Chen and Yang Chen, who were surrounded by the sword realm and the Thunder Prison, their auras were raised to the extreme. They were no weaker than ordinary end realm powerhouses. Standing opposite each other, this time, it was Xiao Chen's turn to attack. His feet moved and Xiao Chen's figure directly disappeared from the spot. Seeing this, Yang Chen didn't panic at all. He reacted immediately and immediately slapped toward his left. However, facing Yang Chen's attack, Xiao Chen was already prepared. He cleverly dodged it. At the same time, he slowly pointed with his finger. Immediately, countless sword qi instantly turned into substantial sword light and instantly enveloped Yang Chen. Countless sword qi instantly swallowed Yang Chen. It seemed like he didn't even have time to react. However, Xiao Chen knew that it was impossible for such an attack to kill Yang Chen. As expected, after being enveloped by the sword qi, in just a few breaths' time, white light bloomed from the dense sword qi. The white light came from the power of countless lightning bolts. Then, with Yang Chen as the center, countless lightning bolts exploded and directly shattered Xiao Chen's sword qi. The attack was easily broken by Yang Chen. However, at this moment, Xiao Chen's killing move finally arrived as expected. The Emperor's sword was directly displayed. A huge sword followed Xiao Chen's finger and slashed toward Yang Chen from the sky. After the sword body had a breakthrough, the power of the Emperor's sword had obviously increased. Compared to the first time Xiao Chen used the Emperor's sword in the wood world, the Emperor's sword at this moment was not only more condensed, but also larger in size. It was like a mountain that fell from the sky and wanted to directly suppress Yang Chen. The power of the Emperor's sword was absolutely not to be underestimated. Even Yang Chen's eyes revealed a hint of seriousness when facing the Emperor's sword. Moreover, because Xiao Chen's previous attack had allowed Xiao Chen to seize the opportunity, Yang Chen had no way to dodge the Emperor's sword at this moment. He could only choose to take it head-on. Countless lightning bolts began to gather on his hands. Moreover, the color of these lightning bolts gradually turned purple-red. Thunder King Seal. Yang Chen shouted angrily and stretched out his hands. Suddenly, countless purple-red lightning bolts formed a huge palm that grabbed the Emperor's sword, as if it was going to crush it. Chapter 2190. Lightning King Seal. This was also Yang Chen's trump card. At this moment, the Emperor's sword and Lightning King Seal clashed head-on. The terrifying shockwaves instantly tore apart space. In the sky, a violent void storm raged wildly. Facing this scene, Sang Xing and the End Realm Elder from the Heavenly Sect opened their mouths and shouted at the same time. "Everyone, back off." Xiao Chen and Yang Chen were obviously going all out. At this moment, the shockwaves from their battle weren't something that the people present could block. Even Dao Realm experts might be injured if they weren't careful. Without any hesitation, Sang Xing and the Heavenly Sect Elder told everyone to back off. Hearing this, no one dared to hesitate and chose to back off right away. The battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen wasn't something that they could interfere in. It could even be said that from an outsider's point of view, the battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen was much more terrifying than the battle between Sang Xing and the other two End Realm experts. Of course, as End Realm experts, Sang Xing and the End Realm Elder from the Heavenly Sect could block the shockwaves from the battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen. Therefore, the two of them didn't choose to back off. Instead, they continued to fight intensely. As soon as the battle began, each of them unleashed their killer moves. The scene in the sky was like the end of the world. In the end, Xiao Chen's Emperor's Sword and Yang Chen's Thunder King Seal suddenly exploded at the same time. Suddenly, the terrifying residual power seemed to sweep across and burst open in the sky. Xiao Chen and Yang Chen were also forced back by the terrifying shockwaves. However, the two of them weren't injured and their auras were still at their peak. In the end, no one had the upper hand in the clash of trump cards. They looked at each other. Then, Xiao Chen and Yang Chen didn't hesitate at all. They both moved their feet and attacked each other at the same time. Xiao Chen had the support of the Sword Realm, while Yang Chen had the support of the Thunder Prison. Both of them had raised their battle strength to the extreme. At this moment, apart from Sang Xing and the Elder of the Heavenly Sect who could still clearly see the movements of the two, the others could only see the afterimages of the two at most. There was no way to accurately capture the movements of the two. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Chen and Yang Chen had already exchanged more than 100 blows. Sonic booms constantly resounded in the area where the two of them were fighting. Every time they resounded, a small black hole would appear in the space. These black holes were forcefully created by Xiao Chen and Yang Chen. In just a few moments, the sky looked as though a pit had been dug into the ground. Numerous black holes appeared in the sky, giving off an indescribable feeling. They had already gone all out and didn't hold back at all. They couldn't remember how many blows they had exchanged. However, they knew that until now, neither of them had the upper hand. They were still evenly matched. It was difficult to determine the winner, but this was expected. In fact, it was difficult to determine the winner in a battle between geniuses because everyone had a lot of trump cards. Most of the time, the battle would be over before they could reveal all of their trump cards. Of course, unless it was a life and death battle. In that case, it might be possible for them to reveal all of their trump cards. However, this also required a process. It was difficult to determine the winner in a short period of time. The fierce battle continued. At this time, it was actually a matter of who could seize the opportunity. Whoever could seize the moment when the opponent might reveal a flaw would be able to severely injure the opponent. However, it was almost impossible for geniuses like Xiao Chen and Yang Chen to reveal their flaws. In the fierce battle, neither side gave the other a chance. Since this was the case, they could only rely on themselves to create an opportunity. Yang Chen was the first to lose his patience. 2 balls of purplish-red lightning condensed above his hands. These purplish-red lightning were specially condensed by Yang Chen. Its power was much stronger than ordinary heavenly lightning. Lightning fall. When the purplish-red lightning formed, Yang Chen drew an arc in front of him with his hands. Immediately, balls of purplish-red lightning floated in front of Yang Chen. As Yang Chen's voice faded, these balls of lightning instantly exploded. However, this explosion wasn't a direct explosion. Instead, it turned into tiny lightning spots that looked like fireflies. They were extremely tiny and numerous. It could be said that they covered the entire sky. With such a dense lightning spot, it would be difficult to perfectly dodge it no matter how fast one was. Let's see how you dodge this time. Yang Chen thought to himself as he looked at Xiao Chen with a sneer. Although the offensive power of the lightning fall was far inferior to the Lightning King seal, it won in terms of quantity. In the face of such a large number of lightning spots, anyone would be hit. It was impossible to perfectly dodge them. Moreover, these lightning spots were extremely sensitive. As long as there was the slightest vibration, they would immediately explode. At the same time, the surrounding lightning spots would also be affected and explode at the same time. The surroundings were already filled with Yang Chen's lightning fall. However, Xiao Chen's expression didn't change. He gently waved his hand. In an instant, countless sand and dust on the ground soared into the sky. Before Yang Chen could react, the tiny sand and dust in Xiao Chen's hand instantly turned into sharp Jiani swords. When used with the sword body, anything could be used as a sword. This was the most terrifying part of the sword body. It was indeed impossible to perfectly dodge Yang Chen's lightning fall. However, Xiao Chen had never seen the need to dodge it. Since he couldn't dodge it, he would break it head-on. Countless sand and dust turned into sharp swords in Xiao Chen's hand. In an instant, the sand and the lightning fall continuously collided. Explosions continuously occurred in the sky. The lightning fall was detonated one by the sand. Following this series of explosions, the sky seemed to have turned into a sea of lightning. At the same time, due to the sand and dust, the entire sky was covered by yellow sand. Xiao Chen and Yang Chen's figures were also directly swallowed by it. The lightning fall was also directly broken by Xiao Chen. Yang Chen also felt that the sword body was difficult to deal with. Being able to use anything as a sword was indeed the lifelong goal of countless sword cultivators. However, before Yang Chen could breathe a sigh of relief, under the cover of the yellow sand, Yang Chen vaguely saw a huge black shadow. It was attacking him from all directions. At first, Yang Chen didn't see anything. However, as the yellow sand gradually dispersed, Yang Chen discovered that it was actually a huge mountain, as well as countless trees and green grass. These extremely rare things had now become powerful swords in Xiao Chen's hands. Surrounded by sword aura, they didn't give Yang Chen any time to react. They fiercely attacked Yang Chen. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 2191. Everything could be used as a sword. This was the terror of the sword body. Facing Xiao Chen's ferocious attacks, Yang Chen knew that he had no chance of dodging. He could only brace himself and receive it. The Thunder King body was fully unleashed, forming a dense force of thunder and lightning around Yang Chen. The force of thunder and lightning protected Yang Chen as it clashed violently with Xiao Chen's attack. The two collided. At this moment, Xiao Chen and Yang Chen didn't hold back at all. Terrifying shockwaves spread out wildly. Facing the full force of the two, even Song Xing and the Hetian sect elder couldn't take it anymore. Even though the two of them were End Realm experts, the battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen made them feel pressured. At this moment, Song Xing and the Hetian sect elder unconsciously pulled away from Xiao Chen to weaken the shockwaves of the battle. Xiao Chen and the Hetian sect elder naturally didn't have time to care about Song Xing and the Hetian sect elder's actions. At this moment, Xiao Chen and Yang Chen were completely enraged. Moreover, in such an intense battle, they couldn't afford to be distracted or careless. After an intense collision, the enormous figure was finally completely torn apart by Yang Chen's lightning energy. It turned into dust that filled the sky and slowly fell. Although he successfully blocked Xiao Chen's attack, Yang Chen also paid a price for it. A trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. It seemed like he was injured. Xiao Chen wasn't too surprised that Yang Chen successfully blocked the attack. Without giving Yang Chen any time to breathe, Xiao Chen directly leaped up and engaged in an intense battle with Yang Chen once again. With the Wuchen sword in hand, Xiao Chen had already raised the power of the sword body to the extreme. Every time he slashed out, a terrifying sword energy would streak across the sky. As the sword energy streaked across, the space was easily torn apart. In the face of Xiao Chen's violent attacks, Yang Chen did not show any signs of weakness. Numerous lightning bolts revolved around his body as he continuously bombarded Xiao Chen. In the fierce battle, the two of them could be said to have used all their methods, and neither of them was willing to back down. After successfully dodging Xiao Chen's sword, killing intent surged in Yang Chen's eyes. At the same time, he shouted in a low voice, "Thunder King's body." Following Yang Chen's words, the lightning around him quickly condensed, instantly forming a heavy lightning armor around him. With the support of the lightning armor, Yang Chen's aura continued to rise. At the same time, he moved his feet and his figure instantly disappeared from the spot. It was impossible to capture his movements. It was as if he had teleported. Before Xiao Chen could react, Yang Chen's figure appeared on Xiao Chen's left side. At the same time, he threw out a fierce punch. Terrifying lightning bolts condensed on Yang Chen's fist. The absolute power made the surrounding space unable to withstand such a force. A strange look flashed in Xiao Chen's eyes. In the face of Yang Chen's sudden surge in combat strength, he immediately put up a defense. A sword wall instantly formed in front of him, trying to block Yang Chen's punch. However, after displaying the Thunder King's body, Yang Chen's strength had increased tremendously. The sword wall could not resist for long before it was forcefully broken by Yang Chen. Then, the lightning fist hit Xiao Chen fiercely. In an instant, Xiao Chen was sent flying. He fell from the sky violently. On the ground, smoke and dust rose, and Xiao Chen's figure was directly engulfed by the dust. After successfully injuring Xiao Chen, the Thunder King's body could be said to be Yang Chen's last resort. It was also his greatest trump card. At the same time, it was also the most terrifying ability of the Thunder King's body. With the power of lightning bolts supporting his body, he could explode with unimaginable combat strength in a short period of time. Since he had already used his last trump card, Yang Chen naturally would not give Xiao Chen any more chances. After sending Xiao Chen flying with a punch, Yang Chen did not stop. He moved and attacked Xiao Chen again. Facing Yang Chen's fierce attack again, Xiao Chen, who had been sent flying with a punch, had a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. A cold light flashed in his eyes. At the same time, the sword aura around him became denser at this moment. "Transforming my body into a sword," Xiao Chen shouted in a low voice. As his voice fell, a blood-red sword will slowly appeared behind him. At the same time, Xiao Chen's sword aura was raised to an extremely terrifying level. The extremely dense sword aura instantly tore apart the space and ground around Xiao Chen. Transforming his body into a sword was also Xiao Chen's last resort. At the same time, it was also a new superpower that Xiao Chen had mastered after his sword body had broken through to the initial perfection realm. Facing Yang Chen's Thunder King's body, Xiao Chen had no other choice but to use transforming his body into a sword. Only in this way could he have the power to fight. Seeing Yang Chen rapidly attacking him, Xiao Chen raised his Jiani slash. The power that erupted from the slash was not any weaker than the Emperor's sword. This was the terrifying power of transforming his body into a sword. It could increase the power of Xiao Chen's ordinary attack by several times or even more than 10 times. A huge sword light cut through the sky and directly shot towards Yang Chen. Facing Xiao Chen's sword, Yang Chen did not dare to be careless. he immediately raised his fist and punched out. The two collided fiercely and then cancelled each other out. However, this was just the beginning. After Yang Chen blocked his first attack, Xiao Chen, with a blood-red sword will behind him, slowly rose into the air. At the same time, the long sword in his hand slashed out again. It was another slash that was not any weaker than the Emperor's sword. As Xiao Chen continued to swing the sword in his hand, streaks of terrifying, huge sword auras streaked across the sky. Xiao Chen's attacks at that moment were equivalent to continuously casting the Emperor's sword. Such power and such quantity could be described as devastating. However, facing such a Xiao Chen, Yang Chen did not show any signs of weakness. He continuously punched out with his fists and fought fiercely with Xiao Chen. The collision between the two caused the surrounding space to completely collapse. Sang Xing and the Hetian sect elder, who had already retreated far away, could see a hint of surprise in each other's eyes. What kind of joke was this? At this time, when the two of them faced Xiao Chen and Sang Xing, they actually felt a trace of fear. Facing Xiao Chen and Yang Chen in such a state, Sang Xing and the Hetian sect elder had to admit that even if they went up, they would not be a match for the two of them. Even Sang Xing and the Hetian sect elder, who were End Realm experts, found it hard to block the aftermath of the battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen. Helpless, Sang Xing and the Hetian sect elder tacitly continued to retreat into the distance, completely giving the entire space to Xiao Chen and Yang Chen. With the current state of Xiao Chen and Yang Chen, even End Realm experts would not be able to interfere in their battle. This was because even if an End Realm expert was involved, they would probably be heavily injured or even die. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2192. The battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen had reached a point where even an End Realm expert like Sang Xing would find it difficult to interfere. The offensive abilities displayed by the two of them were such that even an End Realm expert would have to avoid them. The battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen had reached a point where even an End Realm expert like Sang Xing would find it difficult to interfere. The offensive abilities displayed by the two of them were such that even an End Realm expert would have to avoid them. Although it wasn't difficult to see that the two of them wouldn't be able to hold on for too long in their current state. After all, whether it was Yang Chen's Thunder King body or Xiao Chen's sword transformation, both of them consumed a lot of energy. Even if they could deal a lot of damage in a short period of time, they wouldn't be able to hold on for too long. The sky was directly torn apart mercilessly. At the place where the two of them were fighting, the sky had been completely shattered. The terrifying aftermath of the battle crazily spread in all directions. Even Tong City, which was far away from the opportunity, could clearly feel the terrifying aftermath of the battle. Within Tong City, countless cultivators had already climbed up the city walls. Their eyes were all looking at the place where Xiao Chen and Yang Chen were fighting fiercely. Although the crowd couldn't see the scene of the two of them fighting fiercely, it didn't stop them from feeling excited and nervous. Just from the aftermath of the battle that was constantly spreading, the crowd could already feel that the intensity of the battle was far beyond what they could believe. Previously, Xiao Chen and Yang Chen, as well as the Sword Sect and Heavenly Sect, both sides had gone through a series of probing attacks. Now, both sides had truly attacked. Naturally, they wouldn't show any mercy. Everyone was paying attention to the outcome of this battle, especially the outcome between Yang Chen and Xiao Chen. After all, the two of them weren't only the geniuses of the Great Thousand World, but they were also the sect masters of the two sections. The final outcome of the battle was very crucial. No one could interfere in the battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen. After a series of fierce battles, Xiao Chen and Yang Chen had finally reached the final moment of the battle. The two of them had already taken out their trump cards and did not hold back in the slightest. Their strength had surpassed their peak, and the battle prowess they unleashed shocked Sang Xing and the elder from the Heavenly Merging School. Yang Chen's Thunder King physique and Xiao Chen's body of the sword could be said to be their strongest techniques. Under such conditions, both Xiao Chen and Yang Chen had to bear a huge consumption every second. In the fierce battle, Xiaochen and Yangchen were both seriously injured. At the same time, the spiritual power in their bodies was also flowing out rapidly. Even though every attack they made could be described as destructive, such an intense battle was indeed a heavy burden for them. Looking at the current state of the two of them, there were quite a few wounds on their bodies. These wounds were all forcefully cut open by the berserk spiritual energy in the surroundings. Blood kept gushing out from the wounds, but Xiaochen and Yangchen had no time to pay attention to it. At this time, they only had one thought in their minds, and that was to completely defeat the other party. It would be best if they could kill the other party here. The dustless sword in his hand kept slashing out. With Xiaochen's current state, it was actually not difficult for him to kill a Dao realm expert with a casual slash of his sword. However, Yangchen was not an ordinary person. He was not at a disadvantage when facing Xiaochen and had been holding on. However, no matter how strong a person was, there was still a limit. At this time, Yangchen was obviously about to reach his limit. Blood kept flowing out from the corner of his mouth, and his condition was getting weaker. Although Xiaochen was in the same situation, he was unwilling to give up. He slashed out again, and the terrifying sword light attacked Yangchen again. Yangchen did not hesitate and immediately punched out. The fist light and the sword light collided fiercely. It was unknown how many times the two of them had clashed head-on. 97 Chinese. However, this time, after clashing head-on with Xiaochen, Yangchen finally reached his limit. He spat out a large mouthful of blood, and his consciousness quickly became blurry. His aura began to weaken rapidly, and his face was as pale as paper. After using the Thunder King body and fighting with Xiaochen for such a long time, Yangchen could not hold on any longer. His body swayed as if he could fall from the sky at any time. However, Yangchen held on to his last breath and stared at Xiaochen. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but unfortunately, he could not say a word. His vision turned black, and he fell to the ground. Yangchen had already fallen into a coma due to his severe injuries. This was naturally the best opportunity for Xiaochen. However, just as Xiaochen was about to draw his sword, his own condition had also reached its limit, which was not much better than Yangchen's. He just wanted to attack with his sword and take advantage of this opportunity to kill Yangchen. However, no matter how hard Xiaochen tried, he could not attack with his sword. At the same time, Xiaochen's vision began to blur, and his consciousness gradually became unclear. Like Yangchen, Xiaochen had really reached his limit. His injuries made Xiaochen unable to continue fighting. His body swayed for a moment, and finally, like Yangchen, he fell to the ground. Xiaochen and Yangchen were both seriously injured and unconscious. Fortunately, at the last moment, Sangxing and the elder from Etienne's sect acted at the same time and caught the two unconscious people. In this battle, Xiaochen and Yangchen could be said to have gone all out. The battle strength that erupted made Sangxing and the others gasp in amazement. Although it ended in a situation where both sides were injured, it was still shocking enough. After catching the unconscious Xiaochen and Yangchen, Sangxing and the elder from Etienne's sect did not attack again. They faced each other in the air, and the elder from Etienne's sect finally shouted unwillingly, "Let's go!" Yangchen was seriously injured and unconscious. Although Xiaochen's condition was not much better, this was the Sword Sect's territory after all. It was meaningless for the Etienne sect to continue fighting. Moreover, who knew when the Sword Sect's reinforcements would arrive? In addition, Yangchen's injuries were in urgent need of treatment. Compared to Tong City, Yangchen, as the sect master, was undoubtedly more important to the Etienne sect. They could not let anything happen to Yangchen. Following the elder's words, the people from Etienne's sect immediately chose to retreat. In this regard, Sangxing had no intention of stopping them. Just like the Etienne sect, Xiaochen's injuries also needed immediate treatment. Therefore, Sangxing gave up on stopping the people from Etienne's sect. Allowing the people from Etienne's sect to leave, Sangxing immediately fed Xiaochen a healing elixir to prevent Xiaochen's injuries from worsening. Both sides had suffered great losses in this battle, and neither side had gained any advantage over the other. But all in all, Swords Gate was still in a better position. At least Swords Gate managed to protect Tong City and thwart Yang Chen's initial plan. Chapter 2193. From the Sword Sect's point of view, it was obvious that the Sword Sect had succeeded this time. This was because the Sword Sect had successfully defended Tong City and thwarted Yang Chen's plan. Yang Chen's plan to launch a sneak attack on Tong City had ultimately failed. However, from Xiao Chen's point of view, this battle could not be considered a success because Xiao Chen was unable to defeat Yang Chen. Both of them could be said to have ended in a draw. Neither of them was able to defeat the other. Under the lead of the elder from Sangxing and the Heavenly Sect, both sides left. The Heavenly Sect naturally left the Sword Mansion and once again entered the territory of the Thousand Weapon Mansion. Yang Chen was severely injured and unconscious. The people from the Heavenly Sect naturally did not dare to stay in the Sword Mansion for long. Everyone was aware of this fact. As for Xiao Chen, he was brought back to Tong City by Sangxing for treatment and recuperation. The news of the battle in Tong City quickly spread throughout the Great Thousand World. Everyone on the battlefield also knew the outcome of the battle. Moreover, on the main battlefield, the many experts of the Sword Gate and the Heavenly Gate who had been fighting fiercely for several days also chose to temporarily stop fighting after suffering heavy casualties at the same time. However, both sides did not withdraw. Obviously, the battle was far from over. This was the fourth time the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect had clashed. This time, Yang Chen and Tao Ming knew that they would either succeed or die trying. The Heavenly Sect had taken the initiative to retreat the previous 3 times. However, this time, it was obviously impossible for the Heavenly Sect to retreat. The only thing they could do was to fight to the death with the Sword Sect. They would either succeed in destroying the Sword Sect or be destroyed by the Sword Sect. There was no third option. Because of this, the Heavenly Sect did not have the slightest intention of retreating even after such a tragic battle. Instead, they continued to deploy their troops to the battlefield. Compared to the Heavenly Sect, the Sword Sect also had no other choice. As a result, both sides were obviously in a stalemate. During this period, a battle could break out at any time. Therefore, both sides were extremely tense. After the battle with Tao Ming in the Sword Sect's encampment, although Jun Wuya's strength was superior to Tao Ming's, he was unable to kill him. However, this was not a pity because it was already within his expectations. Jun Wuya, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the other deputy sect masters sat together. Xiao Chen sighed. As the ancestor of the Sword Sect, naturally, he had to carry the flag. Sitting on the main seat, he listened to the reports from the people below about the battle in Tong City. He heard that Xiao Chen and Yang Chen had both suffered heavy injuries in the end. Both of them were seriously injured and had fallen into a coma. Yang Chen had been brought back to the Myriad Weapon Mansion by the experts of the Heavenly Sect. As for Xiao Chen, he was recuperating in Tong City and was still in a coma. After hearing the reports from Zhou Song and the others about the battle in Tong City, Jun Wuya did not say much. He just said faintly, "Tell Sangxing to stay in Tong City and take good care of the sect master. Also, guard against the second sneak attack of the Heavenly Sect." He did not allow Sangxing to return to the battlefield. Although Yang Chen and the others had retreated from the Sword Mansion, who could guarantee that they would not come back? Therefore, there must be someone to guard Tong City. At present, it seemed that Sangxing was the best candidate. After hearing Jun Wuya's words, Zhou Song and the others nodded in agreement. Xiao Chen definitely had no time to care about the battle at the front. After all, he was seriously injured and was still in a coma. After receiving Jun Wuya's order, Sangxing also stayed in Tong City. On one hand, he took care of Xiao Chen, and on the other hand, he continued to guard against the Heavenly Sect. The battle between the two sides seemed to have reached the intermission stage. However, in the Great Thousand World, the news of the battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen had already spread. For the first time, the world truly witnessed the terror of the Great Thousand World's geniuses. Have you heard that the sect master of the sword sect and the heavenly sect master of the heavenly sect had a great battle in Tong City? It is said that their true battle strength has already surpassed the end realm. Is that so? I heard that Xiao Chen and Yang Chen both have strength comparable to emperors. Is that true? News of the battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen spread all over the Great Thousand World. The more it spread, the more bizarre it became. Some people even began to say that geniuses like Xiao Chen and Yang Chen were actually emperors. It was because of this that Jun Wuya and the other older generation experts chose to give up their positions. However, such rumors were obviously not credible. Xiao Chen and Yang Chen had indeed not reached the emperor realm, and the gap between them was still very large. However, the battle strength displayed by the two of them was indeed enough to shock many people. At least the rumor that the End Realm experts could no longer interfere in the battle between the two of them was true. It was a battle that could destroy the world. The place where Xiao Chen and Yang Chen fought was now completely barren. It was said that even the shattered space took a full 3 days to recover due to the aura left behind by the two of them. The outside world was in an uproar because of the battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen. This battle was also known as the Battle of the Two Dust. The Heavenly Yin Tower's Tower Lord, Yin Sheng, was currently leading the experts of the Heavenly Yin Tower to fight against the Heavenly Planning Hall. Apart from the ceasefire, Yin Sheng also heard about the Battle of the Two Dust. After learning that Xiao Chen and Yang Chen were both heavily injured, Yin Sheng's eyes flashed with fighting spirit. Xiao Chen, your head belongs to me, Yin Sheng. No one can take it away. Don't die. Although Yin Sheng wasn't present at the battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen, he was certain that most of the rumors were true. Apart from those rumors that were too exaggerated, the others were all quite plausible. For example, Xiao Chen and Yang Chen both had the strength to kill End Realm experts. Yin Sheng didn't doubt this at all because he could do it too. If he could do it, then it wasn't surprising that Xiao Chen and Yang Chen could do it too. Xiao Chen and Yang Chen's battle caused other than Yin Sheng, Dao Ju, Li Chun, and the other geniuses to be filled with fighting spirit. One could say that Xiao Chen and Yang Chen's battle caused the blood of all the geniuses in the world to boil. It unknowingly ignited the flames of war in their hearts. Not only Yin Sheng, but Li Chun also muttered softly. Brother Xiao Chen, has it started on your side? Xiao Chen had already fought Yang Chen head-on. In Li Chun's opinion, his battle with Yin Sheng was about to start. As the first battle between the Heavenly Policy Mansion and the Heavenly Yin Tower, Li Chun and Yin Sheng had yet to fight head-on. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2194. The battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen unintentionally pulled the other geniuses into an intense battle. The first was the battle between Li Chun and Yin Sheng. The battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen unintentionally pulled the other geniuses into an intense battle. The first was the battle between Li Chun and Yin Sheng. As the first two sects to start a war, the battle between Li Chun and Yin Sheng had always been the focus of attention. However, it was a pity that Li Chun and Yin Sheng hadn't fought head-on since the start of the war. However, on this day, as the Heavenly Policy Mansion and the Heavenly Yin Tower once again engaged in a huge battle, Yin Sheng and Li Chun, these two Heaven's Pride monsters, finally met each other head-on. An intense battle instantly erupted around the two of them. Just like the battle between Xiao Chen and Yang Chen, the battle between Li Chun and Yin Sheng was also unusually intense. At the same time, the combat power displayed by the two of them also shocked the world. The battle between Li Chun and Yin Sheng lasted for 3 whole days. During these 3 days, the two of them could be said to have fought until the sky collapsed and the earth darkened. Even the End Realm experts from both sides couldn't interfere in the battle between the two of them. In the end, the battle between Li Chun and Yin Sheng also ended with both of them suffering heavy injuries. However, as the battle between Li Chun and Yin Sheng ended, before the world could recover from the shock, the third battle between geniuses broke out. The two sides of this battle were the sect leader of the Saber sect, Dao Ju, and the Dragon Princess of the Dragon Palace, Long Qing. Among the two geniuses, Dao Ju's reputation was obviously not small in the Great Thousand World. Compared to Dao Ju, Long Qing didn't reveal much of her strength. However, after the battle between the two of them, the combat power that Long Qing displayed also made the world blush with shame. This was because compared to Dao Ju, Long Qing's strength wasn't weak at all. Compared to the other geniuses, Long Qing didn't have any battle achievements to speak of. In fact, many people in the Great Thousand World didn't even acknowledge Long Qing's identity as a genius. If it weren't for Long Qing's identity as the Dragon Girl of the Dragon Palace, she probably wouldn't have been able to enter the ranks of the geniuses. However, Long Qing had never paid much attention to this. Therefore, Long Qing had never refuted the doubts of the outside world. But this time, because of the war between the Saber sect and the Dragon Palace, Long Qing had no choice but to confront the Dao Ju. However, this battle became the battle of Long Qing's reputation. In the face of a genius recognized by the Great Thousand World, Long Qing was not afraid at all. At the same time, his combat strength made Dao Ju unable to gain any advantage. It was the first time that Long Qing made a real move. Once he made a move, he broke all the doubts. At the same time, he used his own strength to prove to the world that he was indeed qualified to be a genius, and that he did not rely on Dragon Palace. The battle was still intense, and it was still hard to imagine. The three battles between geniuses made the world know that the strength of these geniuses had long exceeded the imagination of the world. Even if the forces behind these geniuses were not taken into account, their own strength alone was enough to make them strong in the Great Thousand World. If an emperor didn't appear, who could do anything to these geniuses? In the past, people thought that an End Realm Almighty might be able to suppress these geniuses, but now it seemed that even an End Realm Almighty would find it difficult to suppress them. Unless it was an End Realm Almighty who was only one step away from the Emperor Realm, they might have a chance of winning. Four geniuses fought 2 more battles. At the same time, Xiaochen, who was in Tong City, finally woke up from his coma. Xiaochen had been in a coma for almost 7 days. Naturally, he didn't know what had happened in the outside world. He shook his dizzy head, and under Tsang Xing's narration, Xiaochen learned what had happened in the outside world while he was in a coma. He learned that Yang Chen had escaped from the Sword Mansion and returned to the 10,000 Weapon Mansion. At the same time, Li Chun and Yin Xing had fought a great battle. Xiaochen didn't say much about it. However, when he heard that Long Qing and Dao Ju had just fought a great battle yesterday, and both of them were seriously injured and in a coma, Xiaochen's face finally changed, and a hint of worry flashed in his eyes. "Is my second sister okay?" As this concerned Long Qing's safety, Xiaochen was naturally worried. He was about to send a letter to Long Qing to ask about his condition, but he was stopped by Tsang Xing. According to reliable information, Long Qing's life was not in danger for the time being. However, like Xiaochen, he was seriously injured and in a coma. Therefore, even if Xiaochen sent a letter to Long Qing, it would be useless. This was because Long Qing had no way of healing Xiaochen. Secondly, the entire Great Thousand World was in a complete mess. Other than the shrines, Moon Palace, Dan Valley, and Mutian Mountain, the rest of the major forces had all gone to war. At this time, even if Xiaochen wanted to help Long Qing, the Sword Sect couldn't spare any extra manpower to support the Dragon Palace. Moreover, in such a critical period, the Sword Sect couldn't do without Xiaochen, the sect leader. Therefore, it was impossible for Xiaochen to help. Given the current situation, Xiaochen had to defeat the Heavenly Sect as soon as possible to free up his hands to solve the problem of the Dragon Palace. After hearing Tsang Xing's words of comfort, Xiaochen gradually calmed down. At the same time, after knowing that Long Qing's life was not in danger, Xiaochen secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The Great Thousand World was in a complete mess. Everyone knew that. Now, there were wars everywhere in the Great Thousand World. The geniuses and demons fought fiercely with each other, and so did the sovereigns. Zheng Wuya and Tao Ming, Long Yuan and Dao Xiong had all fought fiercely. However, compared to the battles between the geniuses and demons, the results of the battles between the sovereigns were unknown. After all, the End Realm experts weren't qualified to watch the battles between the sovereigns. As such, no one knew the results. All in all, Xiao Chen's first priority was how to deal with the Heavenly Sect and how to let the Sword Sect successfully get rid of the threat of the Heavenly Sect. Only in this way could the Sword Sect and Xiao Chen be able to help the Dragon Palace and Long Qing. After exhaling a mouthful of turbid air and gradually calming down, Xiao Chen nodded and said softly, "I was too agitated just now. Right now, the Heavenly Sect is the most important thing. It's good that Sect Master can think it through." Moreover, with the strength of the Dragon Palace, the battle with the Saber Sect has entered a stalemate. It is impossible to determine the winner in a short time. Moreover, Long Qing, as the Dragon Girl of the Dragon Palace, will naturally be closely protected by the Dragon Palace. Sect Master can rest assured about this. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Song Xing replied. It was not easy for the Saber Sect to kill Long Qing. After all, Long Qing's position in the Dragon Palace was very high. Naturally, there was no lack of protection from the experts of the Dragon Palace. Therefore, Xiao Chen did not have to worry too much about the safety of Long Qing for the time being. Please collect, vote, recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 2195. Xiao Chen didn't have the energy to intervene in the affairs of Dragon Palace for the time being. However, he didn't have to worry too much about Long Qing's safety for the time being. First, he had to solve the problem of Heavenly Sect. Xiao Chen didn't have the energy to intervene in the affairs of Dragon Palace for the time being. However, he didn't have to worry too much about Long Qing's safety for the time being. First, he had to solve the problem of Heavenly Sect. After figuring this out, Xiao Chen asked Song Xing about the current situation of the battle. Faced with Xiao Chen's inquiry, Song Xing answered truthfully. The battle between the Sword Sect and Heavenly Sect had almost entered a stalemate. Both sides had won and lost. In the battle between the sovereigns, although Jun Wuya had a firm advantage, it was difficult for him to kill Tao Ming. Therefore, judging from the current situation, it was impossible to determine the winner in a short period of time. Hearing this, Xiao Chen fell into silence. In fact, Xiao Chen had already guessed the strength of the Sword Sect and Heavenly Sect before the battle. The result was indeed as Xiao Chen expected. The Sword Sect and Heavenly Sect were indeed evenly matched. However, even so, this battle couldn't be so hasty. There had to be a winner, but Xiao Chen couldn't see the time to decide the winner. The main battlefield was in a stalemate. After the battle with him, Yang Chen fled the Sword Mansion and entered the territory of the Myriad Weapon Mansion. After that, he disappeared and didn't know where he went. He secretly thought that if he could kill Yang Chen, it would definitely be a huge blow to Heavenly Sect. At that time, it would be possible to defeat Heavenly Sect in one fell swoop. Of course, this was also Xiao Chen's hope. However, after the last battle, Xiao Chen also knew that it was difficult to kill Yang Chen. In fact, whether it was Xiao Chen killing Yang Chen or Jun Wuya killing Tao Ming, it was enough to change the direction of the entire battle. Unfortunately, it was so easy to achieve these two goals. For the time being, Xiao Chen did not have any good ideas, so he could only bide his time. Moreover, he had not fully recovered from his injuries yet. Recuperating was the most important thing at the moment. After all, no one knew when the next battle would break out. With no intention of returning to the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen chose to stay in Tong City to recuperate. At the same time, he ordered Song Xing to secretly send spies into the Myriad Weapon residence to investigate Yang Chen's whereabouts. Now that the Tianyin Tower and the Heavenly Policy Palace were engaged in an intense battle, the defenses of the 10,000 weapon residence should be very weak. It should not be too difficult to send out spies to infiltrate the 10,000 weapon residence. Tong City seemed to have regained its peace once again. Xiao Chen's injuries were also getting better by the day. Moreover, after nearly 10 days of teasing, Xiao Chen's cultivation had actually broken through to the advanced Dao realm. This was a blessing in disguise. Due to the battle with Yang Chen, Xiao Chen's cultivation had successfully broken through and his strength had improved once again. After half a month, Xiao Chen's injuries had finally recovered. On the other side, the spies sent to the Myriad Weapon residence had finally returned with news about Yang Chen. Like Xiao Chen, Yang Chen did not return to the Heavenly Sect. Instead, he stayed in the Myriad Weapon residence in a place called Yu City to recuperate. After learning about Yang Chen's whereabouts, Xiao Chen quickly had a bold idea in his mind. Since Yang Chen did not choose to return to the Heavenly Sect and remained in the Myriad Weapon residence, it meant that he had not given up on Tong City and wanted to launch a second sneak attack on Tong City. However, Yang Chen did not make a move because Xiao Chen was still in Tong City. Since that was the case, Xiao Chen quickly thought of a way to give Yang Chen a taste of his own medicine. Since Yang Chen had not given up on Tong City, Xiao Chen would take advantage of the time when Yang Chen thought that he was still in Tong City to secretly leave Tong City with his men. After that, he would head straight for the Heavenly Sect and launch a sneak attack on an important stronghold of the Heavenly Sect. If he succeeded, he would definitely be able to catch the Heavenly Sect off guard. Since the battle had progressed to this stage, Xiao Chen had to think of a way to break the stalemate. After explaining his idea to Zhang Xing, after hearing Xiao Chen's idea, Zhang Xing hesitated for a while before saying, "Sect leader, although this idea is indeed unexpected, there is a huge problem. Once Yang Chen leads his men to launch a second sneak attack on Tong City will not have enough strength to resist." Xiao Chen wanted to do the opposite. However, once Xiao Chen led Zhang Xing and his men out of Tong City would no longer have any strength to resist Yang Chen's second attack. Zhang Xing's worry was not unfounded. Xiao Chen had indeed thought of this. In response, Xiao Chen said calmly, "There is no such thing as a sure thing in this world. How can we succeed if we don't take a gamble? I am betting that Yang Chen will not dare to attack Tong City again." Xiao Chen's idea was to secretly lead Zhang Xing and his men out of Tong City, and then head to the hinterland of the Heavenly Sect through the Myriad Weapons Prefecture. During his departure, he would create the illusion that he was still in Tong City, betting that Yang Chen would not dare to continue attacking Tong City. By the time Yang Chen discovered that Xiao Chen had secretly entered the Heavenly Sect and launched a sneak attack, it would be too late. It could be said that Xiao Chen's plan was indeed a gamble. He was betting that Yang Chen would not dare to continue attacking Tong City. In this way, Xiao Chen would have time to launch a sneak attack. Once this plan succeeded, the situation would change. At that time, the Heavenly Sect on the battlefield would be attacked from both sides. Xiao Chen's plan was indeed very bold. It could even be said that it was a gamble. It all depended on whether Yang Chen had the guts to attack Tong City a second time. In fact, Xiao Chen had no choice but to think this way. Because there was not much difference in strength between the two sides, it was indeed very difficult to determine the winner without using some extreme means. Even Xiao Chen himself had no idea how long the battle would last or how it would end. Perhaps both sides would end up badly wounded. As for mobilizing the experts of the Sword Sect from the main battlefield to defend Tong City, Xiao Chen did not even think about it. Now that both sides were in a tight spot on the main battlefield, if Xiao Chen mobilized experts from the main battlefield to Tong City, wouldn't it put the Sword Sect at a disadvantage? Xiao Chen obviously would not do such a stupid thing. Xiao Chen would not move from the main battlefield. Similarly, Yang Chen would not move from the main battlefield. Therefore, the only thing Xiao Chen could do was to set up a smoke screen in Tong City, making Yang Chen think that he had been guarding Tong City all this time. This time, he would buy time for himself and make Yang Chen not dare to attack Tong City again. The success of this plan depended on whether he could deceive Yang Chen. As long as he could deceive Yang Chen, Xiao Chen was confident that he could make the Heavenly Sect suffer a great loss, or even directly turn the situation around. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2196. Xiao Chen's idea was too bold, but Zhang Xing was still worried that Yang Chen would see through Xiao Chen's plan and attack Tong City a second time. What would they do then? Xiao Chen's idea was too bold, but Song Xing was still worried that Yang Chen would see through Xiao Chen's plan and attack Tong City a second time. What would they do then? However, compared to Song Xing's caution, Xiao Chen felt that they should take a gamble, because once they succeeded, the gains would undoubtedly be huge. There was no doubt about that. Moreover, even if Yang Chen saw through his deception and attacked Tong City a second time, the worst that could happen was that they would lose Tong City. Xiao Chen could still forcefully launch a surprise attack from behind the heavenly sect and both sides would still suffer losses. If they succeeded, they would make a huge profit, but if they failed, they might suffer a small loss. However, it was still completely within Xiao Chen's acceptable range. In that case, why not take a gamble? Xiao Chen indeed wanted to end this battle as soon as possible and completely destroy the heavenly sect, so he took such a risk. Facing Xiao Chen's insistence, although Song Xing still had doubts, he still nodded in agreement. After all, Xiao Chen was the sect master. Song Xing could raise opinions, but he couldn't deny Xiao Chen's decision. Once Xiao Chen made a decision, as a subordinate, Song Xing could only carry it out unconditionally. Song Xing was very clear about this. Moreover, although Song Xing was cautious, he also knew that once Xiao Chen's plan succeeded, it would definitely be fatal to the heavenly sect. With such great benefits, it was indeed worth taking a gamble. Song Xing didn't stubbornly insist and chose to agree. Seeing this, Xiao Chen smiled faintly and immediately gave Song Xing a series of instructions. In fact, it was to make Yang Chen think that they were in Tong City all the time after they left. The most important thing was that everything should remain the same. He could not activate the defensive formation just because he had left, because that would be telling Yang Chen that he had left. It was still the same as it was now, but in secret, they had to actively capture the spies sent by the heavenly sect. They couldn't be allowed to wander around Tong City to gather information. Xiao Chen was not worried about capturing the spies of the heavenly sect. After all, both the sword sect and the heavenly sect no longer had the ability to send out a large number of spies. At most, they would send out a small group of spies to gather some information. As a result, Xiao Chen was not worried about this. Secondly, he had to report Yang Chen's movements 3 times a day so that Xiao Chen could keep track of Yang Chen's whereabouts and the situation in Tong City. Xiao Chen's requirements were very simple. He didn't have to be reluctant to use the sound-transmitting talisman. Although the price of the sound-transmitting talisman wasn't cheap, there was nothing to be reluctant about in this critical period. Song Xing was told a lot of things to pay attention to. As for Xiao Chen's instructions, Song Xing kept them in mind. Immediately, Xiao Chen ordered Song Xing to make preparations. The fewer people who knew about this, the better. Even the cultivators in Tong City had to think that they were still in Tong City. They decided to set off late tomorrow night, giving Song Xing a day to prepare. Time was indeed tight, and this was because there were a lot of things that needed to be arranged in Tong City. Otherwise, Xiao Chen would have to set off tonight. After handing over the matters in Tong City to Song Xing, Xiao Chen used the sound-transmitting talisman to send a message to Jun Wuya, telling him that he was preparing to go to the hinterland of the heavenly sect and launch a surprise attack. Xiao Chen completely handed over the main battlefield to Jun Wuya. Soon, Jun Wuya, who received Xiao Chen's message, replied. Jun Wuya did not object to Xiao Chen's plan. He just reminded Xiao Chen to be careful and pay attention to his own safety. After all, if something happened to Xiao Chen, it would be a huge blow to the sword sect. As for the main battlefield, Jun Wuya also told Xiao Chen that there was no need to worry. Tao Ming would not be able to break through. Only Jun Wuya was in charge of the main battlefield. Now, neither side could do anything to the other. In Xiao Chen's view, the only thing that could really change the situation was his small surprise attack. Once it succeeded, even if he could not immediately defeat the heavenly sect, it would definitely be enough to make them suffer. For the next day, Xiao Chen made preparations while waiting for the results from Song Xing. It was not until evening that Song Xing found Xiao Chen and told him that everything was ready. At this time, he did not tell anyone else. Only the two sword sect experts who stayed behind in Tong City knew. Xiaochen was naturally confident in Song Xing's ability to handle matters, so he did not ask much. After hearing Song Xing's report, Xiaochen nodded and said, "Well, then get ready. We will set off at night." After all, this kind of thing naturally had to be done as soon as possible. They could not give Yangchen too much time. Moreover, the camouflage that Xiaochen set up in Tong City was actually not a very clever method. It could work for a short time, but once it was over, Yangchen would definitely find out. At that time, it would not be easy to hide it from Yangchen. Therefore, Xiaochen must complete this surprise attack before Yangchen could react. This time, in addition to Song Xing, Xiaochen also brought 3 sword sect sword heads and more than 10 elders with him. There were not many people, less than 20 in total, but each of them was not weak. The weakest of them was in the enlightenment realm. Although there were few people, they were all experts of the sword sect. This way, they would not be a big target. At the same time, they could increase their speed by a lot, which was what Xiaochen needed the most at the moment. As for sneaking into the Hetian mansion, Xiaochen was not worried. This was because the experts of the Hetian mansion were all on the front line. The rear could be said to be very empty. With Xiaochen's strength, it was enough to complete this surprise attack. Not long after, everyone was ready. In the courtyard, Xiaochen whispered to everyone, "This time, our goal is to be fast and not attract any attention. Therefore, everyone must keep a low profile along the way." Hearing Xiaochen's words, everyone nodded in unison. Then, the group of people used the cover of the night to secretly leave Tong City. After taking a detour, Xiaochen entered the myriad weapon residence from another direction. He did this so that the spies sent by Yangchen would not be able to detect him. The most important thing was to hide in one's heart, at least until they reached the Hetian mansion. After successfully entering the myriad weapon residence, it was just as Xiaochen had expected. Because of the fierce battle between the Heavenly Policy residence and the Heavenly Yin Tower, the myriad weapon residence could be said to be extremely empty. Very easily, Xiaochen led everyone into the myriad weapon residence and headed straight for the Hetian mansion. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2197. The operation to infiltrate the 10,000 weapon mansion was very successful. Along the way, Xiaochen's group did not encounter any danger and successfully entered the territory of the 10,000 weapon mansion. This could be considered a good start. The operation to infiltrate the 10,000 weapon mansion was very successful. Along the way, Xiaochen's group did not encounter any danger and successfully entered the territory of the 10,000 weapon mansion. This could be considered a good start. Of course, the reason why they were able to infiltrate the territory of the 10,000 weapon mansion so easily and did not encounter any Heavenly Yin Tower's cultivators was because of the current situation. At this moment, the Heavenly Yin Tower had placed all of their attention on the battle with the Heavenly Policy mansion. Naturally, their rear was defenseless. Furthermore, the Heavenly Yin Tower was very clear that the Sword Sect, who was currently fighting with the Heavenly Sect, did not have any extra energy to do anything to the Heavenly Yin Tower. As such, they naturally relaxed their defense against the Sword Sect and transferred all of the experts who were originally guarding against the Sword Sect to the front line. This gave Xiaochen's group this opportunity. However, infiltrating the 10,000 weapon mansion was only the beginning. Next, because they needed to avoid being noticed, Xiaochen's group definitely could not use the transportation array to directly enter the territory of the Heavenly Sect. This was because they would definitely be discovered by the Heavenly Yin Tower. Therefore, Xiaochen's group could only use their own 2 feet to rush to the Heavenly Sect. As such, they naturally wasted a lot of time. However, there was no other way. Furthermore, in order to make the best use of time, Xiaochen did not leave much time for rest along the way. They would only stop to take elixirs and rest when their spiritual energy was exhausted. Along the way, they avoided the various large cities in the 10,000 weapon mansion. Xiao Chen's group headed straight towards the direction of the heavenly sect. At the same time, while they were rushing, Xiao Chen was constantly thinking about this sneak attack. He wanted to see if there were any loopholes in his plan that needed to be fixed. Xiao Chen had already thought of the target of the sneak attack. It was the spiritual vein planes within the heavenly sect. The spirit vein plane was similar to Tong's city and Sword Mansion. It was where more than half of the spirit veins in Hetian Prefecture gathered. It was also an important source of income for Hetian sect. It could be said that more than half of the Heavenly Gate's spirit stones were produced from the spirit vein planes. Once the spirit vein planes were destroyed, it was equivalent to cutting off the economic lifeline of the Heavenly Gate. As a result, the Heavenly Gate would gradually be at a disadvantage in the following battles. Don't think that just a few spirit veins would be enough to change the outcome of a battle between two great sections. One had to know that this was absolutely not an exaggeration. First of all, in a war between two major powers, especially two major powers like the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect, it was almost impossible to decide the victor in a single battle. In a situation where there was no way to decide the victor in one battle, both sides were likely to turn into a war of attrition, just like the current situation. And what did a war of attrition consume? It was nothing more than the warriors on both sides and their respective financial resources. Warriors were easy to understand. Whoever had more warriors dying in battle would naturally be at a disadvantage in the end. As for financial resources, it was medicinal pills, all kinds of healing herbs, and so on. And these things, to put it bluntly, had to be bought with spirit stones. So without spirit stones, it was equivalent to not having medicinal pills for healing. And in a situation where there were no medicinal pills, just imagine what would happen. The simplest example was that if two people had the same injuries, the one who had healing medicinal pills was likely to survive, while the one without healing medicinal pills was undoubtedly going to die in the end. In this way, in a fierce battle, the Sword Sect had healing medicinal pills, so the injured people could quickly recover. On the other hand, the Heavenly Gate had no healing medicinal pills, so the seriously injured people could only wait for death. Under such a situation, one could imagine what the final result would be. And even if the Heavenly Gate's warriors didn't die, the frequency of the battles between the two sides was getting higher and higher. Sometimes, before their injuries were healed, they had to participate in the next battle. If this kind of consumption happened a few times, the drawbacks caused by the difference in the number of medicinal pills would be infinitely magnified. Therefore, a war between two major forces was different from a battle between two warriors. In addition to hard power, there was also a contest of soft power. This was also why Yang Chen chose Tong City as the location of the surprise attack. Obviously, he was also very clear about the importance of Tong City to the Sword Sect. Once the spirit stone veins around Tong City were destroyed, it would definitely be a devastating blow to the Sword Sect. Yang Chen was very clear about the importance of the spirit stone veins to a major force, and so was Xiao Chen. Therefore, Xiao Chen didn't directly attack the Heavenly Gate, but chose to target the spirit stone plane instead. San Xing was very supportive of Xiao Chen's choice. In his opinion, attacking the spirit stone plane was far more cost-effective than attacking the Heavenly Gate directly. While rushing, he thought about the various details of attacking the spirit stone plane in order to make sure nothing went wrong. While Xiao Chen and the others were stealthily making their way toward the Hetian Prefecture, Yang Chen, who was in Yu City, was also paying close attention to everything that was happening in Tong City. Just as Xiao Chen thought, until now, Yang Chen had always thought that Xiao Chen was still in Tong City. Moreover, the reason why Yang Chen hadn't retreated until now was that he was unwilling to give up and wanted to attack Tong City again. However, after the fierce battle with Xiao Chen last time, Yang Chen was very clear that as long as Xiao Chen was in Tong City, it would be very difficult for him to succeed. At most, the result would be the same as the last time, where he and Xiao Chen would both suffer. On one hand, he was unwilling to give up, and on the other hand, he couldn't do anything to Xiao Chen. Therefore, Yang Chen had been staying in Yu City to wait for the right opportunity. In the garden, Yang Chen sat in the pavilion with a thoughtful expression. His injuries were almost healed. Although the speed of recovery was not as fast as Xiao Chen's, it was not much slower. From this, it could be seen that Yang Chen's physical body was actually very strong. He had been considering whether to continue attacking Tong City, but after thinking about it, Yang Chen felt that launching a second attack on Tong City at this time was not worth the loss. Because with the failure of the first attack, the surprise effect had completely disappeared. Moreover, after so many days, Xiao Chen still stayed in Tong City. Obviously, he was deliberately guarding against Yang Chen and guessed that Yang Chen might attack Tong City a second time. Now that Xiao Chen had taken precautions, given Yang Chen's character, it was obvious that he would not go through the trouble of attacking Tong City. Not to mention whether he could succeed or not. Even if he succeeded, the price he would have to pay would be very high. Moreover, with Xiao Chen around, Yang Chen didn't think that he could succeed. While thinking about the next plan, Yang Chen secretly thought to himself, do I really have to fight Xiao Chen head-on? Do I have to return to the battlefield and force Xiao Chen to fight head-on? But even so, Yang Chen didn't have the slightest confidence of winning. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2198. From the very beginning, Yang Chen wanted to change the situation by launching a surprise attack on Tong City, but Xiao Chen successfully resolved it. Now, Yang Chen didn't know where to start. From the very beginning, Yang Chen wanted to change the situation by launching a surprise attack on Tong City, but Xiao Chen successfully resolved it. Now, Yang Chen didn't know where to start. It was hard to say who would win in a head-on battle, and Yang Chen didn't have absolute confidence. Besides, Tao Ming himself said that he wouldn't be a match for Jun Wuya if the battle dragged on. At the same time, Yang Chen also glanced at the Heavenly Sect elder beside him and asked faintly, "How's the situation in Tong City?" If Yang Chen had a choice, he would definitely be more willing to use Tong City to break through. Although Yang Chen knew that Xiao Chen definitely wouldn't leave Tong City at this time, on the other hand, Yang Chen really hoped that Xiao Chen would leave Tong City so that he could take advantage of the situation. Even though he had guessed the answer in his heart, Yang Chen still didn't give up. In the face of his inquiry, the Heavenly Sect elder also replied truthfully. There's nothing strange. Xiao Chen should still be in Tong City. Before leaving, Xiao Chen's preparations had obviously worked. At this moment, Tong City didn't have the slightest abnormality. Therefore, the Heavenly Sect elder also speculated that Xiao Chen should still be in Tong City. This elder couldn't be blamed. After all, no one would have thought that Xiao Chen would actually leave Tong City so boldly at such a time. Not to mention this elder, even Yang Chen didn't think in this direction at all. Think about it, knowing that the enemy was eyeing covetously from the side, would you deliberately throw a piece of fat meat into the enemy's mouth? That was obviously impossible. However, Xiao Chen took advantage of Yang Chen's mentality and did the opposite. Yang Chen couldn't have guessed that Xiao Chen had already left Tong City and was rushing towards the Heavenly Sect. Yang Chen didn't expect this at all, so after hearing the elder's answer, he could only shake his head in disappointment and said, the situation still developed into a situation that I didn't want to see the most. The last thing Yang Chen wanted was to fight a protracted war with the Sword Sect. However, the situation had already developed to this point, leaving Yang Chen with no other choice. However, Yang Chen clearly did not know that such a battle of attrition would not last for too long. If Yang Chen did not react in time and allowed Xiao Chen to successfully attack the Spirit Vein Plains, then the consequences would be unimaginable. At that time, Yang Chen would be in an even more passive and helpless situation than now. Yang Chen wanted to attack Tong City for the second time, but after thinking about it, he decided not to move for the time being. He just ordered the Elder of Heavenly Gate, keep a close watch on Tong City. For the time being, Yang Chen didn't have a better solution. All he could do was to keep an eye on Tong City and see if there was a chance to break this stalemate. Upon hearing Yang Chen's words, the elder nodded respectfully. Yang Chen's attention was still focused on Tong City, and he did not notice anything strange. While Yang Chen ordered people to keep a close watch on Tong City, on the other side, Xiao Chen was on his way to Heavenly Mansion. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. In these 3 days, Xiao Chen's group only rested once. The rest of the time, they were rushing. Rushing at full speed consumed a lot of spiritual power, but there was no other way. Xiao Chen had to seize every second, so there was no time to waste. Thanks to Xiao Chen and the others' desperate efforts, the journey that would have taken them half a month only took them 3 days to successfully enter the territory of the Heaven-joining prefecture. After successfully entering the Heavenly Mansion, it would take less than a day to reach the Spirit Vein Plains. However, before that, Xiao Chen still needed to understand the situation of the Spirit Vein Plains. As the saying goes, know thyself and know thy enemy, and you will never be defeated. As for how to understand, it was actually very simple. He just needed to catch a person from the Heavenly Gate and ask. While rushing in the direction of the Spirit Vein Plains, he searched for the figures of the experts from the Heavenly Gate. Just as Xiao Chen thought, the Heavenly Gate's defense of the rear was indeed a lot lax. Of course, no one could be blamed for this. After all, the battle at the front was tense, and more experts were transferred to the front battlefield. As a result, the rear was naturally short of manpower. A day later, Xiao Chen's group arrived at a small city outside the Spirit Vein Plains. This small city was next to the Spirit Vein Plains. It was not difficult for Xiao Chen and his party to sneak into the small city without being noticed. After all, it was impossible for a city of this size to have any cultivators with high cultivation. As such, it was naturally impossible for them to discover Xiao Chen and his party. They went straight to the city lord's mansion. In the end, without any effort, Song Xing took action and captured the city lord's mansion. This person was also a member of the Heavenly Gate. However, he was only a deacon in name. He did not have any status, and his cultivation was only at the Celestial Emperor realm. However, since this person was the city lord and was very close to the Spirit Vein Plains, Xiao Chen still managed to get a lot of answers from him. With his cultivation at the Celestial Emperor realm, he was naturally powerless in front of Song Xing. After seeing Xiao Chen, the city lord was dumbfounded. He had seen Xiao Chen's portrait before, so he recognized the young man standing in front of him at a glance. He was the sect leader of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen. However, why was Xiao Chen here? Shouldn't he be on the battlefield? How did he sneak into the Heavenly Gate's territory and enter the Spirit Vein Plains? He could not figure out why Xiao Chen would appear here. His heart was filled with fear and doubt. However, it was clear that he would not be able to get the answers to his questions. After asking him a series of questions, Xiao Chen got the answers he wanted. He then signaled to a cultivator of the sword gate beside him, and the cultivator immediately killed the city lord with a single slash of his sword. Xiao Chen learned from the city lord that almost all the experts in the Hetian prefecture had rushed to the front line because of the tense situation at the front line. Although the Spirit Vein Plain was important, only one expert in the great perfection of the Dao realm was left to guard it. A Dao realm expert in the Great Completion realm was in charge of guarding the entire spiritual vein plane. This was indeed too lax, but there was no other way. Moreover, it was already not easy to squeeze out a Dao realm expert to guard the spiritual vein plane. The current Tong city was practically defenseless. It was also because Xiao Chen had managed to confuse Yang Chen for the time being that Yang Chen did not dare to make a move. Otherwise, the defense of Tong City would probably be even weaker than that of the Spirit Vein Plain. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2199. The defense of the spiritual veins plane could be said to be very weak. There was only one Dao realm completion expert guarding it. As for the other people's cultivation, Xiao Chen didn't care at all. The defense of the spiritual veins plane could be said to be very weak. There was only one Dao realm completion expert guarding it. As for the other people's cultivation, Xiao Chen didn't care at all. Just as Xiao Chen had expected, due to the intense battle at the front, the heavenly sect's defense at the back was stretched to the limit. After getting the answer he wanted from the governor, Xiaochen immediately discussed with Zhang about attacking the spiritual veins plane. According to Xiaochen's plan, they had to be fast this time. They had to complete the attack before the heavenly sect could react and then retreat. Therefore, in order to meet this requirement, Xiaochen planned to split into 2 groups. He and Zhang would each lead a group of people into the spiritual veins plane and attack at the same time. There are a total of 18 spiritual veins in the entire spiritual veins plane. We will split into 2 groups. Both of us will destroy 9 spiritual veins each. After we succeed, we don't need to stop. We will gather at the main battlefield. At that time, we will launch a pincer attack. It will be best if we can severely injure the heavenly sect in one fell swoop. Master will naturally cooperate with us then. Xiaochen explained his plan to Zhang. As for the expert at the great attainment of Tao realm on the spirit vein plane, Xiaochen planned to deal with him personally. With Xiaochen's current strength, it wasn't too difficult for him to kill a Tao realm completion expert. After hearing Xiaochen's plan, Zhang didn't have any objections and immediately nodded in agreement. Then, that night, Xiaochen and his group split into 2 groups and entered the spiritual veins plane directly. Xiaochen only had one requirement for entering the spiritual veins plane, and that was to be fast. Therefore, along the way, as long as they encountered people from the heavenly sect, they would directly kill them. And now, because there weren't any powerful experts in the spirit vein planes, Xiaochen's group was progressing very smoothly. After parting ways with Zhang, Xiaochen led 7 experts from the sword sect into the depths of the spirit vein planes. When dawn arrived, Xiaochen had already led the group to the largest spirit stone mine in the spirit vein plains. The output of this spiritual stone vein was the largest among the 18 spiritual stone veins in the spirit vein plane. At the same time, it was also where the Tao realm expert in perfection was. His first target was here. Xiaochen naturally planned to kill this person in one fell swoop. After all, he was the only one in the entire spirit vein plane who could pose a slight threat to the experts of the sword sect. Don't worry about anything. Just charge in and destroy this spiritual stone vein. Don't feel that it's a pity, and don't show any mercy. Xiaochen said to the 7 experts of the sword sect beside him. Hearing this, the 7 of them nodded in agreement. After instructing the 7 of them, they didn't have to feel any reluctance. After defeating the heavenly sect, there would naturally be more spiritual stone veins. After finishing his words, Xiaochen no longer concealed his figure and immediately soared into the sky. At this moment, his aura was completely exposed. At the same time, he coldly shouted, "Kill!" Following Xiaochen's shout, the 7 experts of the sword sect were like tigers in a flock of sheep. They immediately charged towards the spiritual stone vein. At this moment, the heavenly sect expert in charge of guarding the spiritual stone vein couldn't stop the 7 of them at all. However, after a short while, a terrifying aura emerged from the depths of the spiritual stone lode. At the same time, a furious roar rang out. "Who are you? How dare you act so presumptuously here?" Hearing this voice, Xiaochen's lips curled into a cold smile. It was obvious that the owner of the voice was the perfect Tao realm expert who was guarding this place. After seeing his target, Xiaochen advanced instead of retreating. Soon, the 2 of them met in the air above the spiritual stone vein. It was a middle-aged man with a perfect Tao realm cultivation. However, at this moment, the moment he saw Xiaochen, the middle-aged man's expression changed drastically. He was already considered a core member of the heavenly sect, so the middle-aged man naturally recognized Xiaochen. He had seen Xiaochen's portrait before, so the moment he saw Xiaochen, the middle-aged man recognized Xiaochen's identity. A look of surprise and doubt flashed across his eyes. The middle-aged man clearly did not expect Xiaochen to appear here. After all, this was the spiritual stone plane, the core area of the heavenly sect. How could Xiaochen appear here? His eyes were filled with surprise. However, Xiaochen clearly did not give him any time to think. Without saying a word, Xiaochen chose to attack. Moreover, he used his full strength as soon as he attacked, transforming body into sword. With a low roar, Xiaochen directly used transforming body into sword. Instantly, the terrifying sword aura around him increased wildly. The space was directly cut open by the sharp sword aura. In order to kill this person in the shortest time possible, Xiaochen did not hold back at all. Sensing Xiaochen's terrifying sword aura, the middle-aged man's heart skipped a beat and he cursed inwardly, "Damn it." He completely did not expect Xiaochen to appear in the spiritual stone plane. Wasn't Xiaochen in Tong City at this moment? Why would he appear in the spiritual stone plane tens of thousands of miles away? Also, how did Xiaochen cross the border between the Sword Mansion and the Heavenly Sect? One should know that there were many experts from the Heavenly Sect there. It was impossible to cross the border. The middle-aged man's heart was filled with doubts. Unfortunately, no one could answer his doubts because Xiaochen had already taken a step forward. At the same time, the dustless sword in his hand slashed down mercilessly. Under the state of transforming body into sword, the power of each of Xiaochen's slashes could not be underestimated. Even though the middle-aged man's cultivation was at the complete Tao realm, he could not help but frown in the face of Xiaochen's slash. He wanted to dodge, but Xiaochen did not give him the chance to do so. He was prepared to receive Xiaochen's slash head-on. Unfortunately, the middle-aged man was sent flying with just a touch. At the same time, he spat out a large mouthful of blood. He was heavily injured by Xiaochen in a single slash. Such a difference in strength shocked the middle-aged man. With his cultivation, he could not even block a single slash from Xiaochen. Xiaochen was terrified, but he did not give the middle-aged man any time to react. Immediately after, he slashed out 2 more times. Then, under the middle-aged man's horrified gaze, Xiaochen used only 3 moves to kill the expert from the Heavenly Sect who was at the great perfection of the Tao realm. At the same time, the other 7 Swords Gate cultivators also successfully destroyed the Spirit Stone mine. Everything happened too quickly, less than a quarter of an hour's time had passed. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2200. In less than a quarter of an hour, Xiaochen and his group destroyed the largest spirit stone lode in this spirit vein plane. At the same time, Xiaochen also directly killed the expert from the Heavenly Gate who was responsible for guarding the spirit vein plane. In less than a quarter of an hour, Xiaochen and his group destroyed the largest spirit stone lode in this spirit vein plane. At the same time, Xiaochen also directly killed the expert from the Heavenly Gate who was responsible for guarding the spirit vein plane. Everything went smoothly for Shifeng. Of course, the most important reason for this was that Coiling Heaven Gate was completely unprepared for this. They did not expect that Xiaochen would appear in the hinterland of the Heavenly Gate Mansion. Because they did not expect it, the Heavenly Gate Mansion was naturally caught off guard. After destroying this spirit stone lode, Xiaochen did not stop. He led the group to another spirit stone lode. Xiaochen pursued speed. He wanted to completely destroy all the spirit stone lodes in the spirit vein plane in the shortest time possible. He wanted to achieve his goal before the Heavenly Gate Mansion could react. Xiaochen's side progressed smoothly. On the other side, Zhangxing did the same. He did not encounter any obstacles at all. Zhangxing also successfully destroyed a spirit stone lode. The attack on the spirit vein plane naturally attracted the attention of the surrounding Heavenly Gate warriors. However, at this time, they were simply unable to stop Xiaochen and his group. This was because their strength was too weak. Those who had strength had already rushed to the front line at this time. Those who stayed behind were basically the old, weak, sick, and disabled, or warriors with low cultivation strength. To put it bluntly, no matter how many warriors there were, they could not stop Xiaochen and his group. Therefore, at this time, no one dared to enter the spirit vein plane. They could only watch as Xiaochen and his group divided into 2 groups and destroyed one spirit stone lode after another. However, the news that Xiao Chen and his group appeared in the Spirit Vein Plain soon reached Yang Chen and Tao Ming's ears. Yang Chen, who was in the Myriad Weapon Mansion's territory, felt more and more strange in Tong City these days. This was because no one had seen Xiao Chen for several days. Although the intelligence had always indicated that Xiao Chen was in Tong City, no one had seen Xiao Chen. This made Yang Chen suspicious. Xiao Chen had already expected Yang Chen's suspicion. After all, with Yang Chen's intelligence, it was obviously impossible to hide it from him for too long. However, even if Yang Chen found out that he had fallen into a trap, what could he do? At that moment, Xiao Chen was already in the plains of spirit veins, and he began to wreak havoc. Yang Chen became more and more suspicious. At the same time, he paid more attention to the information in Tong City. His intuition told him that Xiao Chen was probably no longer in Tong City. Everything that happened before was just an illusion left by Xiao Chen. Yang Chen guessed. But no matter how he guessed, he obviously didn't expect Xiao Chen to be in the Spirit Vein Plain, the hinterland of the Heavenly Gate. When Yang Chen received the message from the Spirit Vein Plain, his first reaction was disbelief. How is this possible? Yang Chen refused to believe that Xiao Chen had actually avoided his sight and appeared in the Spirit Vein Plain without anyone noticing. Moreover, in just a few hours, he had destroyed more than half of the spiritual stone veins in the Spirit Vein Plain. Yang Chen was aware that the rear of the Heavenly Gate was defenseless. A glint of anger and astonishment flashed in his eyes. Yang Chen repeatedly confirmed the accuracy of the information. In the end, he had to admit that Xiao Chen was indeed in the Spirit Vein Plain. Damn it! Yang Chen couldn't help but curse inwardly. He didn't expect that Xiao Chen would ambush the Spirit Vein Plain. Moreover, Yang Chen couldn't be more aware of the huge blow to the Heavenly Gate after the Spirit Vein Plain was ambushed and all the spiritual stone veins were destroyed. It might not be apparent in a short period of time, but as time went on, the economic strength of both sides would be completely exposed. When that happened, the Heavenly Gate's supply of medicinal pills and various battle supplies would be in short supply. They initially planned to ambush Tong City, but in the end, Xiao Chen ambushed the Spirit Vein Plain instead. After confirming the reliability of the information, Yang Chen smashed everything in his house in anger. He couldn't imagine the final outcome of the incident in the Spirit Vein Plain. Xiao Chen, how dare you ambush the Spirit Vein Plain? Fine, since that's the case, I shall destroy your Tong City. In a fit of rage, Yang Chen's first reaction was to exact revenge on Xiao Chen. Since Xiao Chen destroyed the Spirit Vein Plain, Yang Chen would destroy Tong City as well. However, as soon as Yang Chen made this decision, the Heavenly Gate Elder at the side said hurriedly, "Sect Master, you can't do that." Yang Chen wanted to give Xiao Chen a taste of his own medicine, but the current situation obviously didn't allow it. Although Tong City could be said to be in a defenseless state, it would be a piece of cake for Yang Chen to attack it now. Once Tong City was destroyed, Xiao Chen's ambush on the Spirit Vein Plain would be meaningless. At most, both sides would end up in a draw and neither side would suffer any losses. But now, there was a crucial problem: time. Come to think of it, Xiao Chen had successfully ambushed the Spirit Vein Plain, so what would he do next? Without a doubt, he would definitely lead his men to the main battlefield. And at that moment, what Yang Chen needed to do was to return to the main battlefield as quickly as possible. Otherwise, the main battlefield would most likely be defeated in a pincer attack. And once the main battlefield was defeated, even if Yang Chen succeeded in destroying Tong City, what else could he do? Defeat was already set. Xiao Chen obviously thought of this point, which was why he wasn't worried about the safety of Tong City at all. In fact, Xiao Chen might even hope that Yang Chen would directly head to Tong City in a fit of rage. In that case, no one would be able to restrain Xiao Chen on the main battlefield. And with Xiao Chen and Song Xing's strength, it was entirely possible for them to kill the Heavenly Gate End Realm experts. Now that the difference in numbers between the two sides had been pulled apart, the Heavenly Gate End Realm experts had no way of fighting anymore. Xiao Chen even hoped that Yang Chen would attack Tong City instead of returning to the main battlefield. Hearing the elder's words, Yang Chen's heart burned with rage. Although he really wanted to destroy Tong City, he also knew that if he really did so, the Heavenly Gate would definitely lose. Compared to Tong City, the main battlefield was obviously more important and they couldn't afford to lose. Therefore, Yang Chen had to return to the main battlefield as soon as possible to fight against Xiao Chen. Thinking of this, Yang Chen suppressed the rage in his heart and hollered, "Xiao Chen, I will remember this. Let's go." Immediately, Yang Chen led his men and rushed to the main battlefield. At the same time, Xiao Chen's side had also successfully destroyed all the spirit stone mines above the spirit vein plane, completely dealing a heavy blow to the Heavenly Gate. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2201. In less than a day, Xiao Chen's group had successfully destroyed 18 spirit stone veins on the spirit vein plane. The destruction of the spirit vein plane was a huge blow to the heavenly sect's economy. Yang Chen had no choice but to rush to the battlefield. At the same time, on the battlefield, Tao Ming also learned about what happened on the spirit vein plane. His face turned grave as he muttered, "Is the heavens trying to destroy our heavenly sect?" Tao Ming naturally knew how serious the consequences of the destruction of the spirit vein plane were. As time passed and both sides fell into a stalemate, the repercussions of the spirit vein plane would become increasingly obvious. Tao Ming originally planned to send reinforcements back to the spirit vein plane as soon as possible. It would be best if they could capture Xiao Chen alive. This way, they could make up for the loss of the spirit vein plane. After all, Xiao Chen was the sect leader of the Sword Sect. If they could capture him alive, the Sword Sect would definitely be restrained. However, Jun Wuya was clearly prepared. Just as Xiao Chen's group began to attack the spirit vein plane, Jun Wuya also led his men to launch an attack on the battlefield. In the face of Swords Gate's invasion, even if Tao Ming wanted to send reinforcements back to the spirit vein plains, there was no one he could send. This was because once reinforcements were sent back, it would be hard for the Swords Gate to defend themselves in the frontal battle. Once the frontal battle was defeated, the Heavenly Gate's defeat would be sealed. There was no way to send reinforcements back to the spirit vein plane from the battlefield. The only people they could rely on now were Yang Chen's group. Unfortunately, Yang Chen was still in the Myriad Weapon residence and there was no time for him to make it. He could only watch as Xiao Chen destroyed the spirit vein plane. As for Xiao Chen's next move, Tao Ming had already guessed it. He would definitely head to the battlefield and form an encirclement. The destruction of the spirit vein plane was a fact that could not be changed. Moreover, no one could stop Xiao Chen. While Jun Wuya and Tao Ming were fighting fiercely on the main battlefield, in the hinterland of Hetian Prefecture, in the spiritual vein plane, Xiao Chen led his men to rush to the main battlefield after completely destroying the 18 spiritual stone mines on the plain. It was also because of the great success of this operation that everyone was in a very good mood. San Xing even joked with Xiao Chen, "Sect Master, do you think that Yang Chen will attack Tong City out of anger?" San Xing asked if Yang Chen would attack Tong City after learning about the spirit vein plains. Hearing this, Xiao Chen revealed a faint smile. "It's very difficult. However, I do hope that he will attack Tong City. That way, the battle will be decided." Xiao Chen naturally hoped that Yang Chen would attack Tong City because that way, Xiao Chen would be able to deal a heavy blow to the Hetian sect's experts on the main battlefield in the shortest time possible. As long as he could deal a heavy blow to the Hetian sect on the main battlefield, the end of the battle would not be far away. However, although the idea was good, Xiao Chen also knew that Yang Chen was not a brainless person. Yang Chen definitely knew which was more important between Tong City and the main battlefield. He would not give up the entire main battlefield for Tong City. Once Yang Chen returned to the main battlefield, the battle between the two sides would probably fall into a stalemate. After all, the loss of the spirit vein plane did not have any direct impact on the combat strength of the Hetian sect. It would take time to rely on the spirit vein plane to turn the entire battle around. It would require both sides to enter a stalemate and constantly consume their respective financial resources. Only then would the loss of the spirit vein plane slowly become apparent. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Zhang Xing also nodded slightly. He also believed that Yang Chen would not make such a low-level mistake. However, no matter what Yang Chen's choice was, at least now the initiative was gradually in the hands of the Sword Sect. It was only a matter of time. The speed of Xiao Chen's group was not slow, but in order to maintain their peak state at all times, Xiao Chen and the others slowed down a little as they rushed from the spirit vein plane to the main battlefield. After all, they had to be ready to fight at any time. If they consumed too much spiritual power, it would obviously not be worth it. Their journey through the hinterland of the Hetian sect could be said to be unimpeded because at this time, no one could stop Xiao Chen's group. At least, that was the case before they arrived at the main battlefield. After a whole day, Xiao Chen's group finally arrived at the main battlefield. At this time, Jun Wuya and Tao Ming had already led the experts from both sides to fight fiercely. The fierce battle had already lasted for an entire day and night. Both sides had suffered casualties, but the situation was still very fierce. Looking at the two sides in the fierce battle, Xiao Chen did not hesitate. He shouted and led his people to join the battle. The appearance of Xiao Chen's group greatly boosted the morale of the Sword Sect. Seeing Xiao Chen leading his people to kill, many experts in the Sword Sect shouted, "The sect master is here." Xiao Chen's appearance greatly boosted the morale of the Sword Sect side, while the morale of the Hetian sect side was low. Their target was a Hetian sect elder who was fighting fiercely with Nandong Guan. They planned to join forces with Nandong Guan to kill this Hetian sect elder. Sensing Xiao Chen's attack, the Hetian sect elder's expression changed. Facing both Nandong Guan and Xiao Chen at the same time, he naturally did not think that he could win. In fact, he might even be killed. A dignified look flashed in his eyes. Xiao Chen obviously did not want to waste any time, so he went all out as soon as he arrived, transforming his body into a sword. However, just as Xiao Chen attacked, Yang Chen arrived from the other side with his people. Seeing that Xiao Chen wanted to kill the Hetian sect elder with Nandong Guan, Yang Chen naturally would not stand idly by. He immediately activated his Thunder King physique and rushed towards Xiao Chen. At the same time, monstrous hatred erupted from his eyes as he roared, "Xiao Chen, die!" Yang Chen's appearance successfully blocked Xiao Chen. At the same time, the Hetian sect elder who came with Yang Chen also successfully blocked Zhang Xing. For a moment, the crisis of the Hetian sect was resolved. Seeing Yang Chen appear on the battlefield, Xiao Chen's eyes flashed with disappointment, but it was only for a moment. After all, Yang Chen's appearance was within Xiao Chen's expectations. The two of them once again engaged in a fierce battle. Because of what happened in the spirit vein plane, Yang Chen's anger had already reached its peak. Now that he was fighting fiercely with Xiao Chen, it could be said that he wanted to tear Xiao Chen apart to vent the hatred in his heart. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 2202. Xiao Chen and Yang Chen clashed once more. This time, as he had suffered a huge loss at Xiao Chen's hands, Yang Chen was obviously venting his anger and didn't hold back at all. Xiao Chen and Yang Chen clashed once more. This time, as he had suffered a huge loss at Xiao Chen's hands, Yang Chen was obviously venting his anger and didn't hold back at all. Moreover, as they had already clashed last time, the two of them understood each other's strength. They knew that there was no point in testing each other. So, be it Xiao Chen or Yang Chen, they didn't hold back at all. The two of them clashed intensely, terrifying combat strength exploding out. Around them, the experts of the Sword Sect and Heavenly Sect all pulled apart the gap between them. Even the End Realm experts were no exception. What a joke! Everyone knew that Xiao Chen and Yang Chen, who were going all out, were stronger than most End Realm experts. The shockwaves from their battle weren't something that everyone could block. All the space was left for Xiao Chen and Yang Chen. In the intense battle, Yang Chen's killing intent became thicker and thicker. His eyes were about to spit out flames of rage, showing the rage and hatred in his heart. However, his gaze couldn't kill. Facing Yang Chen's rage, Xiaochen didn't care much. He knew that Yang Chen was furious because of his sneak attack on the Spirit Vein Plains. However, so what? As the sect leader of the Sword Sect, what Xiaochen had to do was to defeat and wipe out the Heavenly Sect at all costs. The intense battle continued for a full 3 days and 3 nights. Only then did both sides retreat. However, they left behind a ground full of corpses. Along with each battle, be it the Sword Sect or the Heavenly Sect, many people would be injured or even killed. This was unavoidable, or rather, normal. As for Xiaochen and Yang Chen, after another big battle, they were still unable to determine a victor. In the end, the two of them could only helplessly return to their respective camps. His body was also injured, but fortunately, the injury this time was not as serious as the last time. After taking a healing pill and a night of rest, Xiaochen gradually stabilized his injuries. After his injuries were stabilized, Junwei took the initiative to find Xiaochen. The master and disciple sat together and looked at Xiaochen. Junwei said, "Next, it should be a stalemate." Yang Chen had chosen to return to the main battlefield. In this way, the two sides would definitely enter a stalemate. Only through continuous consumption could they slowly widen the gap and finally decide the victor. Hearing Junwei's words, Xiaochen nodded in agreement. That's right. In fact, if Yang Chen had attacked Tong City, he might have been able to deal a heavy blow to the Heavenly Gate. With the current situation, it was inevitable that the two sides would enter a stalemate. Xiaochen said helplessly. If Yang Chen had attacked Tong City, then in the previous battle, Xiaochen and Sang Xing would have been able to kill at least 2 End Realm Elders of the Heavenly Gate. Once they lost 2 End Realm Elders, it would undoubtedly be a huge blow to the Heavenly Gate. It could even be said that it was a loss that could reverse the entire battle. Unfortunately, Xiaochen's prediction did not come true. Yang Chen also made the most correct choice. He did not attack Tong City and instead returned to the main battlefield. This forced the situation into a stalemate. Regarding this, Xiaochen could not do anything. Seeing that Xiaochen was a little disappointed, Junwei smiled and said, "It's okay. Anyway, the final outcome will not change. Without the Spirit Vein Plains, the Heavenly Gate will not be able to defeat us." The battle had entered a stalemate. What was being compared? It was the wealth of both sides, the reserves of spirit stones and various resources. This was because during wartime, the consumption of various resources was at least several times or even more than 10 times that of normal times. As such, if one did not have enough wealth to support it, one would not be able to last for long. This was especially so for healing pills, which were indispensable. But now, the Heavenly Gate had lost the Spirit Vein Plains. This caused the Heavenly Gate's Spirit Stone reserves to be stretched thin. At this time, one might not be able to see anything, but after a few more battles, the Heavenly Gate would definitely run out of healing pills. At that time, without enough Spirit Stones to buy them, it would be difficult for the Heavenly Gate to fight against the Sword Sect. Junwei clearly knew the direction of the battle. Regarding this, Xiaochen smiled and did not say anything. This time, the destruction of the Spirit Vein Plains had indeed allowed the Sword Sect to take the initiative. On the side of Sword's Gate, those who were injured were given enough healing pellets. With the healing pellets, their speed of recovery was much faster than before. On the other side, inside the Coiling Heaven sect, although there were still some healing elixirs stored in the sect, they were obviously not comparable to the Sword Gates. Tao Ming and Yang Chen, the master and disciple, were also together at this time. However, Yang Chen's expression was very ugly at this time. According to the statistics, the Heavenly Gate's healing pills were only enough to last for 2 more battles. After that, they would have to start buying healing pills. It should be the same for the Sword Sect. However, the Sword Sect was rich and had Spirit Stones. There were also Spirit Stone veins around Tong City that could provide an endless supply of Spirit Stones for the Sword Sect. However, because the spirit vein planes were destroyed, the production of spirit stones had decreased by almost 80%. This made Yangchen very angry. Without spirit stones, there would be no healing pills. Without healing pills, the injuries of the Heavenly Gates warriors could only rely on themselves to slowly recover. As a result, their speed naturally could not keep up with the Sword Sect. When the time came, they would not be able to fight against the Sword Sect. Yangchen was angry in his heart, but there was no way to resolve it. This was all because of Xiaochen. If Xiaochen had not attacked the Spirit Vein Plains, the Heavenly Gate would not have fallen into such a situation. Retreating was definitely out of the question. Once they chose to retreat, the Sword Sect would be able to drive straight into the hinterland of the Heavenly Gate. At that time, the Heavenly Gate would be defeated without a fight. They could not retreat. However, after a long battle, the Heavenly Gate's defeat was inevitable. Unless there was a miracle, or Yangchen could lead people to destroy the Spirit Stone veins around Tong City. However, would Xiaochen give him the chance to do so again? He definitely wouldn't. It could be said that Yangchen did not dare to leave the main battlefield. Once he left, Xiaochen would inevitably launch an attack. At that time, the main battlefield would be defeated. So what if they destroyed Tong City? The situation had been forced into a stalemate. The next step was to see who had more confidence and who could hold on for longer. Damn it, Xiaochen, I will not let you go. Yangchen could not help but curse in a low voice in front of Tao Ming. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2203. Yangchen's hatred for Xiaochen had reached an extreme point. Every time he thought of Xiaochen, Yangchen felt as if there was something stuck in his heart. Yangchen's hatred for Xiaochen had reached an extreme point. Every time he thought of Xiaochen, Yangchen felt as if there was something stuck in his heart. This was not Yangchen's fault. After all, a genius like Yangchen was proud and arrogant. After suffering so many losses in the hands of Xiaochen, it would be strange if Yangchen was not angry. Xiaochen did not care about Yangchen's anger. Now, all he thought about was how to exhaust Hetian's sect. Without the support of the Spirit Vein Plane, Hetian's sect obviously could not defeat the Sword Sect. What Xiaochen needed to do now was to shorten the process as much as possible. He wanted Hetian's sect to be defeated in the shortest time because of the depletion of resources, so that the war would end sooner. Xiaochen was already planning to speed up the pace of the war. On the other side, Saber Sect and Dragon Palace, who were also involved in a fierce battle, stopped fighting after a series of fierce battles with casualties on both sides. The war between Dragon Palace and Saber Sect was fundamentally different from the war between Sword Sect and Etienne Sect. First of all, Dragon Palace and Saber Sect did not have an irreconcilable hatred like Sword Sect and Etienne Sect. Second, this time, the war between the two forces was because someone was behind the scenes. Because Dao Ju's mother's body was in Dragon Palace, the war broke out between the two forces. Since the beginning of the war, after a series of battles, Dragon Palace and Saber Sect actually chose to negotiate. Of course, the process of the negotiation was naturally unknown to ordinary people, because there were only 4 people involved in the negotiation. They were Long Yuan, Long Qing, Dao Xiong, and Dao Ju. On a mountain peak where the two sides were fighting, Dao Xiong, Dao Ju, Long Yuan, and Long Qing sat together and began a formal negotiation. After almost a month of recuperation, Long Qing's injuries were now as good as new. Dao Ju sat opposite Long Qing and said indifferently, "I think you should know that this matter was deliberately manipulated by someone behind the scenes to provoke a war between us. Now, it's meaningless to continue fighting. What do you think?" The main decision-makers of the negotiation were Long Qing and Dao Ju. After all, Long Yuan and Dao Xiong had now retired behind the scenes. Long Yuan was not so sure, but Dao Xiong had really retired behind the scenes, so the final decision was handed over to his son. If Dao Ju decided to fight, the war would still continue. Dao Ju had the right to make the decision on Saber Sect's side. As a venerable emperor, Long Yuan naturally could not personally negotiate with Dao Ju, so Long Qing did it on his behalf. Although Long Qing had not really taken over Dragon Palace, anyone could see that Long Yuan had long regarded Long Qing as his successor. Therefore, Long Qing's words were more and more important in Dragon Palace. Hearing Long Qing's words, Dao Ju showed a rare serious look on his face and said, "Of course I know that. But it's an indisputable fact that my mother's body is in Dragon Palace. Back then, Dragon Palace plotted to kill my mother. That's undeniable, right?" Dao Ju always believed that his mother was killed by Dragon Palace. Otherwise, why would her body be in Dragon Palace? Therefore, even if the whole thing was manipulated by someone behind the scenes, there were still some things that Dragon Palace could not avoid. What Saber Ju cared about now was his mother. Nothing else mattered to him. But as soon as Saber Ju finished his sentence, Long Yuan, who was nearby, spoke slowly. "Back then, it was indeed my Dragon Palace who wanted to monopolize the treasure. But your mother didn't die in the hands of my Dragon Palace. If they wanted to negotiate, they had to solve the problem of Dao Ju's mother. This was something that could not be avoided. Otherwise, Dao Ju would not be willing to give up." As such, Long Yuan could only tell the truth about what happened back then. Back then, Saber Sect and Dragon Palace did join forces to explore the ancient site. Dao Ju's mother was indeed killed in the ancient site, but not by the experts of Dragon Palace. When they explored the ancient site together, they found that it was probably the cave residence of an ancient venerable emperor. There were many powerful treasures, as well as rare elixirs and treasures of heaven and earth. In the face of such precious treasures, who would not be tempted? Therefore, several experts of Dragon Palace came up with the idea of monopolizing the ancient site. However, they did not kill Dao Ju's mother. Instead, they trapped her in a secret room. This secret room was a practice room in the ancient site. It was protected by a formation. After tricking Dao Ju's mother and several experts of Saber Sect into the room, the people of Dragon Palace opened the formation and trapped them inside. Then, after plundering the treasures of the ancient site, when the people of Dragon Palace came to the secret room again, they found that Dao Ju's mother and several experts of Saber Sect were all dead. Someone else had killed Dao Ju's mother and the experts of Saber Sect. Seeing this, the people of Dragon Palace panicked. Finally, after a discussion, they decided to destroy the bodies of the experts of Saber Sect. However, because of the special identity of Dao Ju's mother, Dragon Palace kept her body. They just did not tell Saber Sect about it. After that, the Saber Sect also came to the Dragon Palace to investigate this matter, but the Dragon Palace kept it under wraps until this time, when the corpse of Saber Ju's mother was exposed. Only then did Long Yuan reveal the truth. Dao Ju's mother did not die in Dragon Palace. Hearing Long Yuan tell the truth, Dao Ju still did not believe him. "It has been so many years. If you want me to believe your one-sided story, I'm afraid it's too much. Anyway, there is no evidence to prove what happened. You can say whatever you want." Dao Ju obviously did not believe Long Yuan. Hearing Dao Ju's words, Long Yuan glanced at Dao Xiong, who was opposite him, and then let out a sigh of relief. "I can swear on my martial arts heart that if there is any falsehood in what I say today, I will be struck by lightning and my cultivation will be destroyed." After so many years, Long Yuan could not provide any evidence to prove what he said. In desperation, Long Yuan could only swear on his martial arts heart. Seeing this, Dao Ju was slightly stunned. Dao Xiong glanced at Long Yuan, who looked serious, and then said, "Well, Ju, I believe Long Yuan. If he can swear on his martial arts heart, it will not be false." Dao Xiong was the first to believe Long Yuan. Hearing his father's words, Dao Ju could only nod in agreement. However, in his heart, he basically believed what Long Yuan said. Please add, please vote, please recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 2204. Dao Xiong chose to believe that Long Yuan could swear on his martial heart. Although they were both emperors, Dao Xiong and Long Yuan did not have a deep friendship, and they could even be said to have never seen eye to eye because of Dao Ju's mother. However, Dao Xiong knew that as an emperor, Long Yuan must have his own pride. Long Yuan would not lie to him, let alone swear on his martial heart. After speaking, Dao Xiong looked at Long Yuan and calmly said, "Back then, there was someone else who had entered the ancient ruins. Furthermore, in order to kill so many of our saber sex cultivators without anyone noticing, that person must have been a Dizun. I also guessed so. However, after the incident, I ordered people to secretly investigate, but there was no clue." Hearing this, Long Yuan nodded in agreement. It would be very difficult to kill Dao Ju's mother and the masters of the Saber sect without anyone noticing, unless it was a venerable emperor who took action. In the Great Thousand World, there were only a few emperors. Unfortunately, Long Yuan still could not find any evidence. Hearing Long Yuan's words, Dao Xiong fell silent and did not say anything. At the same time, he looked at Dao Ju. Obviously, he wanted Dao Ju to make the decision. It was up to Dao Ju to decide whether to fight or cooperate. Understanding his father's meaning, Dao Ju looked at Long Qing, took a deep breath, and said, "First, hand over my mother's body. Second, execute those who trapped my mother that day. After all, although my mother didn't die in the hands of your dragon palace, if it weren't for your people who trapped my mother might not have died. If these two conditions are met, I will agree to the peace talks." Dao Ju proposed the terms of the peace talks, but hearing this, Long Qing refused without hesitation. "Impossible. Hand over your mother's body. Even if you didn't say it, I would still do it. However, it is impossible for Dragon Palace to kill our own people." Long Qing could agree to the first condition of Dao Ju, but Long Qing firmly rejected the second condition. After all, the strength of Dragon Palace was not weaker than that of the Saber sect. The peace talk this time was actually the wish of both sides, not a unilateral request of Dragon Palace. Therefore, it was impossible for the Dragon Palace to kill their own people in exchange for peace talks. Moreover, many of those people were now End Realm Almighties. It was impossible for Long Qing to kill their own End Realm Almighties. Wasn't that the same as weakening their own strength? Long Qing's rejection was very straightforward. However, Long Yuan and Dao Xiong, who were not far away, were not surprised at all because this was within reason. Long Qing and the other three continued the peace talks. However, in the encampment of Dragon Palace, Long Mia, who was still the palace master of Dragon Palace, looked gloomy. Below him, two End Realm Almighties of Dragon Palace sat on his left and right with solemn expressions. Long Mia had always been the palace lord of Dragon Palace. However, his position as the palace lord was basically just for show. This was because Long Yuan had the final say in many matters. Long Mia basically did not have any substantial authority. However, after so many years, Long Mia had already gotten used to his identity. But now, his position as the palace lord was about to be lost because anyone could tell that Long Yuan wanted to support Long Qing to ascend to the position. If not for the fact that Long Qing had only joined Dragon Palace for a short time and was not able to convince everyone, his position as the palace master would have been taken away by Long Yuan. Ever since Long Qing joined Dragon Palace, Long Mia had always felt danger. He always thought that his position could be taken away by Long Qing at any time. As time passed, this thought gradually turned into jealousy and resentment. It was precisely because of this that Long Mia couldn't help but have second thoughts. In Long Mia's heart, he thought that he had worked hard in Dragon Palace for so many years. As for Long Qing, she had just joined Dragon Palace for less than 100 years. Long Yuan wanted her to take his position. Naturally, Long Mia was not willing. Therefore, Long Mia had secretly started to plan how to keep his position as the palace master. Unfortunately, in order to keep his position as the palace master, the first task was to get rid of Long Yuan. As long as Long Yuan was there, Long Mia had no chance. However, Long Yuan was an Emperor realm figure after all, and his prestige in Dragon Palace was unparalleled. It was impossible to get rid of him with Long Mie's strength alone. He did not even have the strength to fight against Long Yuan. It could even be said that in front of Long Yuan, Long Mie did not even have the ability to resist. Therefore, on the surface, Long Mie did not seem to have any abnormalities. However, behind his back, Long Mie always wanted to kill Long Qing and Long Yuan so that he could secure his position as the palace master of Dragon Palace. With a cold glint in his eyes, Long Mie glanced at the two people below and then said in a low voice, "Do you think this peace talk will succeed?" 80%. Hearing this, one of them said. This peace talk had the intention of both sides, so the probability of success was very high. Hearing this, Long Mie's eyes became even colder. At the same time, he sneered and said, "What do you think the old ancestor will do next if the peace talk succeeds?" "Support the sword sect." Hearing this, the two people replied almost in unison. Given the relationship between Dragon Palace and the sword sect, or the relationship between Long Qing and Xiaochen, once the War of Dragon Palace ended, Long Qing would definitely support the sword sect. This was unquestionable and unquestionable. They already had the answer in their hearts. In this regard, Long Mie's eyes were suddenly filled with hatred. He almost gritted his teeth and said, "Why? I have done so much for Dragon Palace and worked so hard for so many years. I am even willing to be a palace master in name only. But in the end, the old ancestor wants to abolish my position as palace master because of a little girl. Tell me, why? How am I inferior to Long Qing?" At this moment, Long Mie did not hide his hatred and jealousy. In this regard, the two elders of Dragon Palace below did not say anything, but there was a different look in their eyes. Both of them were Long Mie's confidants and were loyal to him. That was why Long Mie dared to show his true thoughts in front of them. After saying this, Long Mie took a deep breath and then said in a deep voice as if he was making an oath, "Since you are unrighteous, don't blame me for being disloyal. Dragon Palace is mine and I will not give it to anyone. No one can take the position of palace master from me, not even the old ancestor. Please collect, vote, recommend." End of chapter. Chapter 2205. The fire of jealousy in Long Mie's heart was completely ignited. He was unwilling to hand over the position of palace master of Dragon Palace to anyone, let alone Long Qing, who had just joined Dragon Palace. The fire of jealousy in Long Mie's heart was completely ignited. He was unwilling to hand over the position of palace master of Dragon Palace to anyone, let alone Long Qing, who had just joined Dragon Palace. Long Mie did not know that he was blinded by jealousy. On the other side, Long Qing, Dao Ju, Long Yuan, and Dao Xiong were still negotiating. However, judging from the current situation, the chances of success were very high. Although Long Qing rejected Dao Ju's request, he agreed to return the body of Dao Ju's mother. This was what Dao Ju valued the most. Outsiders did not know the whole process of the negotiation. However, one day later, Long Qing, Dao Ju, and Dao Ju returned one after another. Then, both sides withdrew their troops at the same time. Both sides withdrew at the same time, which undoubtedly meant that the negotiation was successful. At the same time, Long Qing returned the body of Dao Ju's mother to Dao sect as agreed. Hearing that the peace talks between Dragon Palace and the Saber sect were successful, Xiaochen was secretly delighted. After all, the success of the peace talks meant that Dragon Palace could free themselves to help him. Moreover, Long Qing would no longer be in danger. On the main battlefield, Xiaochen heard that the peace talks between the Dragon Palace and the Saber sect had been successful. Both sides had chosen to withdraw their troops. Xiaochen was in a good mood. At the same time, facing the heavenly sect, Xiaochen saw the hope of victory. Firstly, the spiritual vein plane had dealt a heavy blow to Hetian sect. Secondly, Dragon Palace could now free themselves to help Sword sect deal with Hetian sect. On the other hand, whether it was Tianyin Tower, Mutian Mountain, or shrines, it seemed that there was no way for Hetian's sect to help. This was because Moon Palace, Dan Valley, and Heavenly Policy Mansion had not made a move yet. They were all restraining each other. Xiaochen was in a good mood, but Yang Chen and Tao Ming were in a gloomy mood. Naturally, they had heard the news of the successful peace talks between Dragon Palace and Saber Sect. However, this was definitely bad news for Heavenly Sect. Because the Dragon Palace would definitely help the Sword School, but the Saber Sect wouldn't help the Heavenly Fusion Sect. After all, the Dragon Palace would definitely help the Sword School, but the Saber Sect wouldn't. In this way, Heavenly Sect would have to face both Dragon Palace and Heavenly Sect at the same time. This was obviously not good news for Heavenly Sect, nor was it something they wanted to see. In the room, Yang Chen sat alone with a gloomy expression. His eyes flickered with a cold glint. He could not help but curse angrily, "Dao Ju, this trash, doesn't even know how to stall for time?" Yang Chen didn't expect that Dao Ju and Long Qing would choose peace talks. Of course, he couldn't control this. Although Dao Ju had made Dragon Palace and Saber Sect fight, the direction of the battle was not something Yang Chen could control. Moreover, neither Dao Ju nor Long Qing would act according to Yang Chen's wishes. However, Yang Chen didn't expect that the two sects would negotiate peace so quickly. Dragon Palace had already gotten involved. Moreover, the Heavenly Sect was still at a disadvantage in the current situation. They were already at a disadvantage. At this time, they had to be on guard against the support of Dragon Palace. This made the Heavenly Sect's situation more and more critical. Even after racking his brains, Yang Chen couldn't think of any way to reverse the situation. It seemed that they had fallen into a hopeless situation. The Heavenly Sect seemed to be doomed. Compared to Yang Chen's heavy mood, Xiaochen was very relaxed. Long Qing had sent a letter saying that Dragon Palace could support the Sword Sect at any time. Xiaochen naturally wouldn't refuse. With the help of Dragon Palace, it would be easier to defeat the Heavenly Sect. However, Xiaochen also wrote back to Long Qing, telling her not to worry. It wouldn't be too late to support Dragon Palace later after they had stabilized the situation. After all, Dragon Palace had just gone through a big battle. At this time, there must be a lot of things to deal with. Moreover, the situation was now in the hands of the Sword Sect. Therefore, there was no hurry for Dragon Palace's support. After replying to Long Qing, a few days later, Xiaochen led the experts of the Sword Sect to attack the Heavenly Sect again. Now that he had the help of Dragon Palace, Xiaochen was even more unscrupulous. He sped up the pace of the battle and tried to take down the Heavenly Sect as soon as possible. Of course, first of all, he still had to exhaust the various healing elixirs in the hands of the Heavenly Sect. Without the healing elixirs, the Heavenly Sect was like a tiger without its teeth. The threat level was naturally greatly reduced. In the face of Xiaochen's attack, Yang Chen naturally had no choice but to lead people to resist. Although Yang Chen knew what Xiaochen was thinking, he couldn't do anything about it. It was impossible to avoid the battle. Retreating was even more impossible. He could only brace himself and face the difficulties head-on. Once again, he fought fiercely with Xiaochen. However, in this battle, Yang Chen was very aggrieved. On the other hand, Xiaochen seemed to be more relaxed. With victory in hand, Xiaochen was not in a hurry. He just kept exhausting Yang Chen. Anyway, with the gap in strength between them, it was not easy to kill each other. So he decided to exhaust Yang Chen first. At this time, Xiaochen was not in a hurry to determine the winner. However, Yang Chen was anxious. Without the spiritual vein plane, the healing elixirs were a great problem for the Heavenly Sect. If the battle continued for a long time, without the support of the healing elixirs, the experts of the Heavenly Sect would undoubtedly be exhausted to death. Not to mention, when the support of Dragon Palace would arrive. Yang Chen's mood was extremely heavy. At the same time, his hatred for Xiaochen was increasing. In the fierce battle, Yang Chen wanted to exchange his life with Xiaochen several times. In this regard, Xiaochen did not confront him directly. While dodging and defending, he sneered and said, "What? You can't keep calm anymore? Xiaochen, don't be complacent too early. We still don't know who will be the winner." Hearing Xiaochen's words, Yangchen shouted angrily. Hearing this, Xiaochen also smiled and said, "We really don't know, but I think the result is already very clear. The heavenly sect will lose this battle." At this time, Xiaochen was full of confidence in defeating the heavenly sect. He was not worried that Yangchen would have any room to turn the situation around, because Xiaochen would not give him such a chance. Seeing Xiaochen's confident look, Yangchen almost ground his teeth to pieces. At the same time, his attacks became more and more fierce. Unfortunately, in the face of his attacks, Xiaochen could easily avoid them. Yangchen was furious, but he could do nothing to Xiaochen. After a fierce battle, both sides suffered casualties and then retreated one after another. However, after each battle, the resources of the heavenly sect were greatly consumed. Unfortunately, the heavenly sect was now very short of resources. Such a battle could happen at most 2 or 3 more times, and the healing elixirs of the heavenly sect would not be enough. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.